Good morning, everyone. And I'm Whitney Lewis. I'm with the Office of the Attorney General, and welcome to our Handle with Care Symposium. Before we get started, I'd like to run over a few housekeeping items so you all know how to participate in today's event. First off, all lines will be on mute. If you have a question, you will have the opportunity to text them into today's presenters. Please type your thoughts into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send them in at any time during today's symposium. We will collect these and address them throughout the Q&A sessions. I will say that similar questions will be combined, and we ask that inappropriate or offensive questions will not be announced. And also, due to time constraints, please try to keep all questions on topic. If you experience any technical difficulties at any point during our presentations, please explain your issues through the chat feature, and we will try our best to address them. We are also recording the symposium, and it will be available on our YouTube page within 24 hours. Please subscribe to New Jersey OAG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Flickr for the latest updates on information, resources, and news from our office. And then lastly, during our keynote presentation, you will all participate in an ACES questionnaire activity. The quiz you see on your screen now can be found in the handout section of the control panel. You may open the handout and take the quiz at any time during the symposium. We ask if you can please compile your score in preparation for the discussion later today. And now I'd like to hand things off for opening remarks from New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal.
Good morning, everyone. I'm New Jersey Attorney General Gurbir Grewal, and I want to thank you for joining us today for this important training. In October, I issued the Handle with Care Law Enforcement Directive. This directive requires law enforcement officers to promptly notify a child's school if that child's been involved in or has witnessed a traumatic event. This Handle with Care notice is a very simple step that can make a big difference in a child's life. That's because it gives schools the information that they need to help mitigate the negative impact of that trauma on a child, rather than unwittingly compound it by disciplining the child for behavioral or performance issues that may be linked to the trauma. We know that law enforcement and educators choose their professions because they want to do good in the world, to be helpers. Law enforcement officers often express frustration that they can't do more to help the children they encounter at a crime scene or in other traumatic situations. Well, now they can. This directive allows law enforcement officers to take an extra step and address the trauma and adverse experiences which unfortunately impact so many young people in our state. I'm very grateful to the Drug Enforcement Administration for introducing Handle with Care to New Jersey. And I'm grateful also to the Chief of the Middle Township Police Department, Chris Lusner, for believing so strongly in this program that he not only introduced it in his own town, but he made it a priority to introduce it across our state when he served as president of our Chiefs Association. This directive is born out of his vision and his leadership. And thank you also to Dr. Angelica Allen McMillan, the Acting Commissioner of the Department of Education, for DOE's partnership in implementing this program across our state. Finally, I'd also like to thank the team at our Division of Criminal Justice, who worked hard to bring this directive to life. Today, you'll not only learn how to implement this program, you'll also hear from experts who will explain the why behind this directive and teach you about the science of adverse childhood experiences, commonly referred to as ACEs. It's the reason why children need early and appropriate intervention after experiencing a traumatic event. Lastly, we'll all do the ACEs survey, and some of us may find out that we carry our own ACEs. That's because the work you do is stressful and it's traumatizing. So even if your score on the ACEs survey is low, you'll learn some techniques from a master resiliency trainer to boost your own resiliency, as well as the resiliency of those around you. Many departments across the state have already implemented Handle with Care with great results. Together, through the collaboration of New Jersey law enforcement and our educators, we can and we will build resiliency in children exposed to trauma. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all you do to protect and serve our communities. Please stay safe.
And next, we'd like to welcome Acting Commissioner Dr. Angelica Allen McMillan from the New Jersey Department of Education.
Good morning. What an honor it is to be here with this group of impassioned educators and public servants to highlight Handle with Care and the importance of thoughtful partnerships between law enforcement and schools. I would like to thank Attorney General Graywall and his entire team for their work spearheading this initiative. To Chief Lusner, Special Agent in Charge Susan Gibson, my colleague Mike McKnight, Superintendents Dr. Salvo and Mr. Castellucci, and the countless other educators and law enforcement officials assembled today. Thank you for your commitment to providing safe and supportive school environments for children recently exposed to a traumatic event known as Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs. Your work is instrumental to schools in carrying out one of their most important missions, that of fostering positive school climates that promote the learning and development of every student. Having spent 25 years in public education, I know firsthand the impact that ACEs can have on a student. Experiences like abuse or neglect, the death of a family member, witnessing violence, and being evicted from your home can have deep and lasting effects on a child's health, well-being, and their ability to learn, grow, and play with their peers in healthy and positive ways. In addition, I know that schools are not always aware when their pupils experience these events. Moreover, schools may not always have the information they need to develop the most appropriate responses for students with adverse childhood experiences. To mitigate the harms of traumatic experiences in our students, to ensure that we do not unwittingly compound those harms, our schools must be deliberate and thoughtful in recognizing how ACEs can affect student behavior and learning, and craft supports for students accordingly. But schools cannot do that if they do not know when a student has been involved in such an event. That is why I am so proud to support the expansion of Handle with Care. It will provide a system for schools to learn that a child has been involved in a traumatic event, empowering schools to provide healthy resiliency building supports for our students. Our colleagues in Cape May County and in communities around the state have shown us the impact this program can have on supporting children in need. I know its expansion statewide will help school communities provide safe, secure, and responsive learning environments that bolster our students' well-being and academic success. Thank you to everyone who made this initiative possible. I hope you will find the rest of the symposium informative and empowering. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And next, we'd like to introduce Chief Chris Lusner from Middle Township Police Department and the immediate past president of the New Jersey State Associations of Police Chiefs.
Good morning. Thank you, Whitney. I'm excited to welcome you to this Handle with Care Symposium. I would like to say thank you to Attorney General Graywall and Commissioner Allen McMillan from the Department of Education for their support. I would also like to thank Assistant Special Agent in Charge of the DEA, Christopher Yocum, who introduced Handle with Care to New Jersey to the Newark City Police Department, Cape County Prosecutor Jeffrey Sutherland, and my fellow coalition members of Cape Regional Wellness Alliance, where a lot of work was done here in Cape May County, together through cross-sector collaboration to reduce the impact of ACEs in our community and help our kids build resiliency. Handle with Care is a simple message to the school from law enforcement that a child was present at a dramatic event, and for that message to get there before the bell rings the following day. The typical communication between law enforcement and schools over the years has been around when a student was arrested or there was an immediate safety concern. We did not typically communicate to the schools that a child was just present at a dramatic event. In Middle Township, we launched this program in 2018. In our first school year, we had 116 referrals. Those aren't 116 kids that were in trouble. Those were 116 kids that saw something or experienced something dramatic. The goal of this program is to get that critical information into the hands of teachers so they know that something recently happened with that student and that they do not do anything to compound the trauma, that they can also refer for immediate support if necessary. You know, I was fortunate enough to travel the state during my tenure as president of the New Jersey State Association of Chiefs of Police. We did a lot of really good work in this area, and I'm proud of the partnership that we formed with Patricia Wright at the New Jersey Principals and Supervisors Association and Richard Baza at the New Jersey School Administrators Association. And last October, we held a symposium, over 200 law enforcement and school executives on this very topic. I can't tell you, at that event and other events throughout the state where I interacted with educators and police officers, how impressed I was of all the work being done in this state in this area. We have terrific educators and police officers who are committed to making a difference and helping kids in our state. They are committed to improving practices and our agencies and our school districts. And you know, the science and research could not be more clear about adverse childhood experiences. We know what is going on in the minds and bodies of kids who've experienced toxic stress and the significant risks that poses to poor social and health outcomes. When a kid comes in contact with the criminal justice system or a disciplinary issue in school, in a large majority of cases, we can trace that back to trauma. Those of us in law enforcement that practice community problem-oriented policing, and I know there are many across this state, engage partners in the community to get at the root cause of crime and social disorder. I submit to you that in many cases, the root cause is trauma. Trauma-informed and responsive practices are emerging across all sectors. I believe that one of the most critical things we can do as leaders, police chiefs, superintendents, principals, teachers, police officers, is to tackle ACEs with a goal to reduce the impact of trauma, which we can do. Police officers are on the front lines in a lot of situations when these occur. There are things we can do to reduce the impact. Send a simple message to the school, and then also foster environments to help kids build resiliency. Have our decisions be based on science and research. We have learned more about the human brain in the last 5 years than we have in the last 25 years combined. We all chose our honorable professions to make a difference. I'm convinced that we all want to leave our communities, our agencies, our school districts better than how we found them. In my view, these trauma-informed responsive practices, not only in field or schools, but with ourselves, the Attorney General mentioned it earlier, will do just that. These practices will help us build safer communities, have safer schools, but it's also a smart business decision. This will save our communities money over the long term. This should be our #1 priority. I look forward to this symposium and this being a step of many on our road to becoming a trauma-informed state here in New Jersey. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Mike McKnight, who is an educational specialist with the New Jersey Department of Education. Mike has written 2 books on this subject with his co-author, Dr. Lori Desautels, who runs the Applied Educational Neuroscience Unit at Butler University in Indianapolis. Mike is an outstanding educator, and we've done a lot of really great work together, and it's an honor to work with you, Mike, and present you. Mike.
Mike, you are muted there. If you could select your mic there.
Right. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen now. Can you walk me through that, Whitney?
There you go. Just hit,
All
if
right.
you want. Yep, if you could just hit slideshow there, we could start that slideshow. Perfect.
Gotcha. Hey, thank you all. Appreciate that, Chris. And I also want to thank the Cape Regional Wellness Committee for bringing us together. It's been a great way to share this work. So let me get started real quickly. Let me give a quick overview about where we are and where and how trauma affects kids and adults. So let's start with some brains. The brain is a social organ developed and changed in interactions with other brains. The organization of the developing brain occurs in the context of a relationship with another self, another brain. This relational context can be growth facilitating or growth inhibiting. And so it imprints into the developing right brain, either a resilience or a vulnerability. I want to take us back a little bit and talk a little bit about the context we all live and work in. I love this quote by Mandela: "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its kids." So a quick overview of the state of children. Each day in the United States, 5 children are killed by abuse or neglect. 8 children or teens commit suicide. 9 children or teens are killed with a gun every day in America. 126 children are arrested for violent crimes daily. 589 public school students are corporally punished every day in public schools in the United States. Yes, there are still 19 states in the United States that allow kids to be paddled in public schools. New Jersey is not one of them, but approximately 166,000 children are paddled in American public schools each year. Corporal punishment is also disproportionately used against children of color and children with disabilities. Every day in America, 1,600 babies are born in poverty. 1,800 children are confirmed as abused or neglected. 1,900 children are arrested, and 14,600 public school students are suspended every day in our schools across this country. Children remain the poorest age group in America, with children of color and young children suffering the highest poverty levels. Nearly 1 in 6, more than 11.9 million, were poor in 2018. Nearly 73% of poor children were children of color. Nearly 1 in 3 Black and American Indian children and about 1 in 4 Hispanic children were poor, compared to 1 in 11 white students. The youngest students are the poorest at the time of greatest brain development. On any given day, over 48,000 youth in the United States are confined in facilities away from home as a result of juvenile justice or criminal justice involvement. But even these high figures represent astonishing progress. Since 2000, the number of youth in confinement has fallen by 60%, a trend that shows no sign of slowing down. Of the 43,000 youth in juvenile facilities, more than 2/3, 69%, are 16 or older. Troubling, more than 500 confined students are at the age of 12. We want to start having schools and everyone connect behavior and begin to see it as not discipline issues, but behavior that is demonstrated by children in pain. A statistic that cries out 73% of girls in juvenile justice have a history of sexual or physical abuse. Toxic levels of stress are not just about other people's children. In 2015, about 3 million teens aged 12 to 17 have had at least one major depressive episode in the past year, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. More than 2 million report experiencing depression that impairs their daily function. About 30% of girls and 20% of boys, totaling 6.3 million teens, have had an anxiety disorder. Experts suspect that these statistics are on the low end of what's really happening, since many people do not seek help for anxiety and depression. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is one of the largest investigations ever conducted to assess the associations between childhood maltreatment and later life and health and well-being outcomes. We will be watching a clip from the documentary film Resilience, the Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope, right after I finish, and that will provide an overview of this groundbreaking study. Here are the 10 original ACE indicators, and this will be part of the screening that you'll be asked to take. Physical neglect, emotional neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, parental divorce, mothers treated violently, household members with a substance disorder, household members with depression or a mental illness, household member in jail or prison. Each one of those would be an ACE. Recently, Dr. Wendy Ellis has added adverse community environments to the adverse childhood experiences work that is continuing to be studied. She has added COVID-19 and the current pandemic to the adverse community experiences, along with the individual ACEs. We can now add in our communities, as well as experiencing this pandemic, high levels of poverty, violence, discrimination, community disruption, poor housing quality or affordability, food insecurities, domestic violence, substance abuse, lack of access to technology, lack of access to remote work and educational opportunities, and higher rates of risk factors and mortality due to chronic disease. There is very little difference between trauma and toxic levels of stress. These are the kids that we're concerned about as they carry in high levels of stress daily into our classrooms and schools, as well as on our streets and communities. Getting closer to home, New Jersey Kids Count data ranks our counties annually by the state of kids. This from 2018 represents the counties in New Jersey and the state of children in 4 broad areas: child and family economics, child health and well-being, safety and well-being, as well as education. You can find your county on here. 1 represents the top county in that area, 21 the bottom county in that area. So you can get a feel of this snapshot of the state of children in our state and in the particular county that you're in. Also getting closer to home, ACEs in New Jersey. This is from a study released in July 2019. It found that over 40% of children in New Jersey, more than 782,000 kids, are estimated to have experienced at least one ACE. 18% of children are estimated to have experienced multiple ACEs in our state. More than 27% of African American children and 22% of Hispanic children in New Jersey are estimated to have experienced multiple ACEs, according to this study. So what is trauma? Again, we want to connect adversity and trauma. Trauma is a Greek word meaning wounded. Trauma is a chronic disruption of connectedness. Trauma is an embodied experience. It is what happens inside of us as a result of traumatic events. It moves us away from connection toward protection. The impact of trauma. In the face of interpersonal trauma, all systems of the social brain become shaped for offense and defensive purposes. A child growing up surrounded by trauma and unpredictability will only be able to develop neural systems and functional capabilities that reflect this disorganization. Brains that have lived in toxic stress habituate and become oversensitive. The overly sensitive amygdala of our most troubled young people lose the ability to discriminate between safety and danger. Their amygdala falsely signals danger and hostility everywhere. These young people are in a persistent state of alarm. Here's what it looks like. On the left, here, a healthy nervous system. On the right here, a graph of a system that has been traumatized. You will see two things. You will see people stuck on or stuck on off, or vacillating really between the two. Stuck on includes things like high levels of anxiety, hyperactivity that can look like ADHD but is not, restlessness, an inability to relax, a hypervigilance, easily emotionally flooded, hostility, anger, and rage. Systems that get stuck on off include a flat affect, chronically tired, a disconnection, a depressed affect, disoriented, and exhausted. These are what toxic stress does to our systems. Other forms of trauma that I'd like to at least introduce, intergenerational trauma. This type of trauma is often associated with racial and ethnic population groups in the US who have suffered major intergenerational losses and assaults on their culture and well-being. The legacies from enslavement of African Americans, displacement and murder of American Indians, and Jews who have endured the Holocaust have been transferred to current descendants and of these groups and others. The results of these events is traumatic stress experienced across generations by individual members of targeted communities, their families, and their neighborhoods. A bit about historical trauma. Historical trauma is an example of intergenerational trauma. It's caused by events that target a group of people. Even family members who have not directly experienced the trauma can feel the effects of the event generations later. If it is not racially just, it is not trauma informed. As I gather toward the end, I did not join the webinar to bum everybody out. Education is always a vocation rooted in hopefulness. So quickly, defining resilience. Resilience is the human capacity to face, overcome, and ultimately be strengthened by life's adversities and challenges. This is not something some people have and some do not. Resiliency is learnable and teachable. The resilience of the human brain. Our brain's impressive capacity to adapt, its plasticity, is a defining feature of being a human. In response to sensory inputs, environmental challenges, and even injury, the brain remodels itself, and we're able to learn and change our behavior. The brain changes a lot between birth and adolescence. It grows in overall size, modifies the number of cells contained within, and transforms the degree of connectivity. The changes don't stop at 18. In fact, scientists now think your brain continues maturing and fine-tuning itself well into the late 20s and early 30s. Anyone parenting or teaching a person under age 30 is not dealing with a fully mature human brain. The most important brain area to become fully wired up in adulthood is the prefrontal cortex, the front portion of the frontal lobe. This area handles many of our higher level cognitive abilities, such as planning, solving problems, and making decisions. It is also where we do school. It is also important in the ability to suppress impulses in favor of more appropriate actions. The adult brain is better wired for cognitive control compared to the adolescent brain, which is more influenced by emotions, rewards, and social acceptance when it comes to making decisions. The profound importance of connection and relationship. The single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. These relationships provide the personalized responsiveness, scaffolding, and protection that buffers children from developmental disruption. They also build key capacities, such as the ability to plan, to monitor and regulate behavior, that enable children to respond adaptively to adversity and to thrive. This combination of supportive relationships, adaptive skill building, and positive experience is the foundation of resilience. One connection can literally turn around the lives of kids. The connection between our schools and their local police departments is really a critical one to forming a web of support for young people in our communities. As Chief Leusner had mentioned, with the statistics from the first year we implemented this in just one of our school districts, well over 116 reports that of young people that the school would have no awareness of what happened the evening before as these young people entered our schools. With the Handle with Care notice to the schools will not get any details about the specifics of what happened with the police involvement, but it will give schools just a heads up of hey, keep an eye on this young person because they may need some extra care and support to make it through the school day. And it's been really helpful to both educators as well as the students and their teachers to really begin to get a sense of, okay, maybe I'm not going to hassle this person for putting their head down and resting a little bit in class today. And without that information, we really don't have that sense of what has happened, what is going on in the lives of the students we teach. So the connection is critical, I think, for supporting young people in our schools and for giving schools at least a heads up of what's going on in their communities. It's been really, really effective in the schools in Cape May County, as well as some other schools that I'm now sure are doing similar things. turn it back over to Whitney.
Thank you, Mike. All right, before we transition over to our next speaker, I just wanted to give everybody another friendly reminder on the ACES quiz and questionnaire activity. Again, this activity you will find in the handout pane of the control panel. You may take the quiz at any point, again, in the symposium. The scores you can just tally and keep to yourselves. We will discuss them in the keynote. All results will be confidential. And we will be sharing, you'll have the opportunity to share via a poll later. So again, if you just check to the handout section, you have the opportunity to just read the questions, tally your scores personally, and then we will share, you'll have the opportunity to share via a poll that is confidential later in the program. But next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Sarah Quigley, the Acting Counsel to the Director of the Division of Criminal Justice. Sarah, I'm going to give you the control now. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
I think you're set, yes.
Okay, can you see my screen here?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today and tuning in, and thank you to the General and Acting Commissioner for implementing this program, and to Chief Lusner and Michael McKnight for your presentations. Every time I listen to you guys, I always learn something, so thank you so much. I'm going to turn now to talk about the Attorney General Directive 2020-9, which implements this Handle with Care program statewide. As you heard from the General, several counties and agencies have implemented certain Handle with Care programs or CARES programs. Middle Township in 2018 with Chief Lusner, Cape May County soon thereafter. Other counties like Hunterdon and Ocean also have CARES programs. And these programs have paid dividends to helping children in these counties. As you heard from Chief Lusner, in year one, 116 children were helped. So replicating this statewide would extend the program's reach to every town and every county throughout the entire state of New Jersey. And the purpose of this program is really about the connection and communication between law enforcement and educators. As you heard from Michael McKnight, there are very serious side effects on children who are exposed to these adverse childhood experiences and traumatic events. And the goal with Handle with Care is to mitigate those negative effects through law enforcement communication with the school. So what generally happens when a child experiences something traumatic is that child has to continue throughout their day. They have to do their homework that night, go to school the next day, take a pop quiz, perform on exams, get called on in class. They have to behave as they normally would in any other day, but it's not like any other day. This child just experienced or witnessed or was a victim to something traumatic. Perhaps the child didn't do their homework that night, or can't focus on the exam, or is getting in fights with other kids at the school, or lashing out at the teacher. The teacher doesn't know that the student just witnessed something traumatic, and the teacher might discipline that student, compounding those negative effects on the child. Imagine you're 10 years old and you just witnessed a family member overdose. You're not doing your homework that night, but the next day you go to school and the teacher calls on you to go over one of these homework questions. You're now embarrassed in front of the class. You have to say that you didn't do the homework. The teacher could reprimand you. The teacher could give you negative marks, and now you're embarrassed. And that can have long-lasting effects on the child. You just saw in the video, something as simple as being reprimanded, by the teacher could feel like a truck is coming at the student. So as law enforcement, what we want to do is do what's in our power to stop that downward spiral and to help the student. So law enforcement who respond to these events, we are in that unique position to help that child by advising the school to simply handle the child with care. We're not trying to fix the problem. We're just trying to help through that communication to let the teacher know and give that notice that the child might just need to be handled with a little bit of care. It's the law enforcement officers who are responding to these incidents. It's the law enforcement officers who know that the child was just a witness or a victim to a traumatic event, and they're the ones that can connect with the school. Before this directive, if this happened to a child in an area where there was a Handle with Care program, then the teacher would know. But if that child was in an area where there was no Handle with Care program, the child's teacher does not know or have any idea what the child just went through, and that the child just recently experienced something traumatic. So they don't know why that child might be acting differently or behaving differently or haven't done their homework. So this directive, again, is all about communication from law enforcement to the school to let the teacher know to simply handle that child with care. So before we get into the directive, to help us better understand the directive, we're going to talk about some of the definitions. For child, it refers to any student, regardless of age, that's enrolled in preschool through 12th grade at either a public or private school. So it doesn't matter whether it's public or private. You are still a child if you are, regardless of your age, enrolled in a school, preschool through 12th grade. So if you're 24 and in 12th grade, this directive applies to you. Point of contact. Point of contact refers to a school employee. This individual will be responsible for receiving all of the Handle with Care notices that are sent by the law enforcement agencies for children who are enrolled in that school. And they're responsible for disseminating that Handle with Care notice to the appropriate teacher of the child. So this could be, this is totally up to the school. It could be 2 or 3 points of contact to make sure that someone is always available. It could be an email system or portal of some sort. I believe DOE may be issuing some guidance to help the schools determine all of this. So the traumatic events. These are events that are broadly construed and may refer to, but are not limited to, some of the following. And this is when a child is a victim or a witness. It could be the arrest of an individual who resides in the home where the child is present, a search warrant that's executed at that residence, or some sort of an overdose of an individual who resides in the home with that child when the child is present. So one thing to note about traumatic events, in addition to them being broadly construed, is that the child needs to be present. So if there's a traumatic event that occurs, but the child is not home, say the child is at school, over a friend's house, that would not be considered a traumatic event for purposes of the Handle with Care directive. So how it works. Law enforcement officer responds to a traumatic event. They see that a child is present. They would complete what's called the Handle with Care notice, and I'll show you that in a couple slides. Actually, I think it's the next slide. They will complete it regardless whether the child attends a public or private school. We're going to really try to do this across the board. And each child would require a Handle with Care notice. So for example, if there are 4 children in the home to which law enforcement are responding to an incident, each of those children should receive a Handle with, or school should receive a Handle with Care notice for that child, even if all 4 kids go to the same school, even if they're all in the same grade and they all have the same teacher. Each child responds differently, so each child should be monitored by that teacher. So here you can see this is the Handle with Care notice. It is the last page of the Attorney General's Directive 2020-9, which can be found on the website. It's also in the handouts section of your control panel. So if you want to take a look at it, you can also find it there. This is the information that is to be filled out by the law enforcement officer. So to the school, what agency it's from, and the date and time of the incident. For the child's information, the school only receives the name, age, school, and grade. And of course, the officer signs it. So there should be no other additional information sent to the school. So there's no details on the actual incident, including the type of incident, whether it was an arrest or a DV, the relationship between the parties. None of that should be shared at all with the school in relation to Handle with Care. I know there's other situations where there's a statute that provides that certain information may be shared with the school. I'm referring to 2A:4A-16-62. These deal with the juvenile charging matters and disclosing information to school. So of course, this directive does not supersede or trump statute. However, for purposes of handle with care, this is all we are sending for handle with care to protect the privacy of the parties. So it is only the information that is on this notice that will be shared with the school. Some more on how it works. So law enforcement is going to fill out this handle with care notice, and they're going to immediately send it to the school's point of contact. So immediately, this is very important. It's prior to the next school day or prior to the child arriving at school, whichever is sooner. So take note if it's a weekend or a holiday, when is the next school day? You want to get it to the school though as soon as possible. This is all about timing, right? Timing is incredibly important here. The whole point of the program is to give the teachers that proper notice that something traumatic happened to one of their students. This is going to help the teacher monitor and mitigate some of those negative effects on the child to the best that we all can. So what happens when the child's school is outside of the law enforcement agency's area of responsibility, or the AOR? Because the officer may not know the point of contact at that school that's outside of their AOR, the officer will send the handle with care notice to the local law enforcement agency where that child's school is located. And then it will be that law enforcement agency that will send that notice immediately to the child's school's appropriate point of contact. So I'll give you an example. Let's say an incident happens at Uncle Joe's house in Trenton. Trenton PD arrives, they see that a child is present. They fill out the handle with care notice. The child indicates that he goes to Hopewell Valley Central High School. Trenton PD will fill out the notice and send that notice to Hopewell PD. Hopewell will then send the notice to the high school's appropriate point of contact. And the reason that we are doing it this way is because the local agencies that will know the schools within their AOR, and they will have those appropriate points of contact. And this is all about efficiency and timing and doing this as fast as possible. So it's quicker to send it to that local law enforcement agency that already has that relationship and contact and knowledge about the school within their area of responsibility. Okay, so we discussed two scenarios so far. The first one is sending the notice to the school of enrollment within the law enforcement agency's area of responsibility. The second is if the child's school is not within that agency's area of responsibility, sending it to the local law enforcement agency where the child's school is located, so that agency can send it to the appropriate point of contact at the child's school. There's a third scenario, and this is where the school returns the handle with care notice because the child is not actually enrolled in that institution. If that's the case, we're asking that law enforcement take special care and make a good faith effort to try to identify the correct school so that they can get that handle with care notice to the teacher as soon as possible. Now, this could mean asking the parent or the guardian or another family member if appropriate. It's really going to depend on the circumstances of the case and what occurred and the law enforcement officer's knowledge of perhaps, the family and the child. So there will be times, however, where the parent or the guardian or other family member is not going to want to give that information. The last thing we want is any sort of confrontation between law enforcement and the family or the child or the child's parent. So in that case, the officer must respect that person's decision not to give that information. So we really want to help the child here. We don't want to create any sort of hostility or tension. However, there are going to be times where law enforcement is going to need the child's school or other information regarding the child that's relevant to a criminal investigation or to ensure the child's safety or health or for awareness to address a concern of imminent danger. So this Handle with Care directive does not restrict the officer from getting that information for those purposes, but if not for those purposes, we would, law enforcement officers must respect a decision from a parent or guardian if they're not going to give over the information on the child's school. There is a record keeping component with this directive. It should be kept in two places. One would be the investigative file of the event that occurred, and the other would be in a much bigger file that is only for your Handle with Care notices, so that all of the Handle with Care notices are in fact in one place. Now, the same type of record keeping will occur with transfer notices. So for example, in that Trenton Hopewell example that I had given to you, Trenton would keep that Handle with Care notice in the investigative file that they have, and they would also keep it in their much bigger Handle with Care notice file. Hopewell, of course, won't have an incident file, investigative file on what happened, but they will have a much bigger, broader Handle with Care notice file. So Hopewell, I'm sorry, will keep that Handle with Care notice in their Handle with Care notice file. In the third situation that we just went over, where the officer is unable to gather all the information needed to send the Handle with Care notice, or the Handle with Care notice was returned and they were unable to get the information to send it, the officer can still, we're asking to fill out the Handle with Care notice as best as possible and still keep it within the investigative file and the broader Handle with Care notice file, so that we still know that there is some record that there being an incident that triggered this Handle with Care program. Okay, so moving forward, there's a training aspect, of course, and you are all here listening to the symposium. It is required that all law enforcement officers attend the symposium or watch it before the end of the year, December 31st. There will be a link that we are going to send out, so law enforcement officers will be able to watch this if they're unable to attend today, right now. So you will get this link. I believe it will also be posted on the OAG's YouTube page, not positive, but it will be posted somewhere. Communication and partnership. So as we roll this out, communication between law enforcement, DOE, the school boards, and the private school administrations is really vital to making this program a success. It's going to be the local agencies and the schools that are going to determine in their discretion how to best and most effectively implement this Handle with Care program in their community. And I believe DOE is putting out some guidance to the educators on this part of it. And as we move forward, we will continue to review and analyze the Handle with Care program to determine and identify where the issues are. We're going to amend as we go. We're going to try to figure out how to make this most effective to help these children in the best possible way that we can. There will be some growing pains along the way, but we will work to make sure that this is the best and most effective way to provide support to the young people in the state of New Jersey. That completes my presentation on the directive. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please reach out to me and I will do my best to help answer any questions that you may have on the directive.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we move on, I just wanted to give everybody a reminder again about the ACEs quiz that you'll find in the handouts area. I also just wanted to note, Sarah had mentioned that the video will be available after the fact. Yes, it will be, so you can just check out on New Jersey OAG on our YouTube page. We will also send it out to all participants. There was also a question on whether or not we will be able to share the resilience video. Unfortunately, we do not have the copyright to share it here, but we will be having a screening during the first week of December. So just stay tuned for your email. We will send out an email notice to let everybody know about that free screening. So next, I'd like to introduce our next speaker today. We're blessed to have Special Agent in Charge, Susan Gibson from the New Jersey Division of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Let's see. So if they welcome Susan.
Good morning. I'm Susan Gibson, Special Agent in charge of the DEA's New Jersey Division. Thank you for having me here to introduce the Handle with Care video. I am very proud of the fact that DEA and New York, New Jersey HIDA played a role in having this program becoming a statewide initiative. DEA's mission is to enforce the Controlled Substances Law of the United States, and we are very good at it. Not many people associate the DEA with being involved in community outreach or education. However, this is also part of what we do. In 2016, the New Jersey Division of DEA and New York and New Jersey HIDA adopted the Handle with Care model from West Virginia. It was initially piloted by Mary C. Snow Westside Elementary School in Charleston, West Virginia in 2013. This was done as a way to bring together educators and law enforcement to provide support and interventions to mitigate the negative impact of trauma for identified students and increase awareness and knowledge of adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACE. We viewed this program as a way to do the same in New Jersey. We initially collaborated with the Newark Police Department and the Newark Board of Education to create the Newark Cares program throughout the Newark public school system. Then from 2017 on, DEA continued to spread awareness surrounding ACEs and trauma in the hopes of educating other law enforcement agencies in towns throughout the state about the importance of this initiative. We worked with our partners and were able to have the Handle with Care program implemented in Ocean County, Monmouth County, and Hunterdon County, all in partnership with those counties' prosecutors and school superintendents. And because of these initiatives, we now have the Attorney General's directive to implement the Handle with Care program across New Jersey. Adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood that could include experiencing violence, abuse or neglect, witnessing violence, or household challenges and neglect. The trauma a child faces could also include the death of a family member or even the loss of a house due to fire or other disaster. A recent survey of adults across 25 states by the CDC showed that they had experienced at least one type of ACE, and nearly 1 in 6 reported they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. ACEs are linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adulthood. Toxic stress from ACEs can change brain development and affect attention, decision-making, learning, and responses to stress. Creating and sustaining safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments for all children and families can prevent ACEs. This is how the Handle with Care program can help. The collaboration between law enforcement and schools can help to make the school aware when one of their students may have experienced some type of trauma. It can provide students with emotional support in their schools when they may have otherwise been punished for displaying outward signs of trauma. If a child who experienced trauma has supportive and caring adults like teachers and caregivers, the negative effects of trauma can be mitigated. The initiative can work to prevent substance abuse, mental health problems, and health issues further into their life. It all starts with the police officer filling out a very simple form and forwarding it to the child's school. I would like to thank Attorney General Graywall, Chief Chris Lausner from the Middle Township Police Department for their support and collaboration. Again, I am very proud that DEA, New York and New Jersey HIDA played a role in the establishment of the Handle with Care programs in New Jersey. It is now my honor to introduce the Handle with Care video. Thank you.
Handle with Care is a vitally important program that enables law enforcement officers to communicate with school personnel regarding traumatic events that may have occurred in children's lives. Handle with Care works when responding police officers identify children who have been subjected to traumatic events. Those officers send a simple, confidential message to the children's schools so educators can monitor the child's behavior and offer help to those in need. Trauma impacts children physically and mentally. and the resulting stress can have negative lasting effects on a child's emotional, mental, and physical well-being. This trauma is commonly referred to as ACEs.
ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So children who are experiencing adversity in childhood, whether that's abuse, neglect, or witnessing domestic violence, or living in a home with some substance abuse, may be impacted by these adversities.
It's scientifically proven that children who suffer from adverse childhood experiences are more likely to have a chronic mental, emotional, or behavioral problem as adults. Nearly half of U.S. children had at least one ACE, and 20% experience 2 or more ACEs.
So the Handle with Care program is an innovative program. A child who experiences an acute situation at home, it enables the law enforcement to connect immediately, communicate with the school and with the educators to assist the child getting through this situation.
Every school in America has children who have experienced trauma, regardless of race, color, creed, or affluence. Every community will have some children who have been subjected to trauma. Handle with Care is such an essential program, not only for city school children, but for the children in schools in the suburbs and rural areas. Loss of a loved one, physical and emotional abuse, divorce. These events in children's lives traumatize them, and through Handle with Care, now the schools are made aware that trauma has occurred so they can help the children.
Well, normally the teacher would just think that the child is just acting out, not knowing they just encountered or experienced something outside of school, which caused them, to behave the way they are inside of school. So it's our job to advise them and let them know, because some kids shut down depending on the situation. Some of them become aggressive and then they want to fight because that's all they see at home.
One of the cases that I could think back of, a warrant execution. As a child, think about how much more traumatic that would be. So of course my heart goes out to that kid right away. I speak to the principal, vice principal, whoever's available. I give them minimum information of what the exposure was, what the traumatic event was, and then we'll work together.
And in a situation that's that severe, I go into immediate action. I want to make sure when that student comes through the building that if they need breakfast that morning, I kind of just check in with them. Hey buddy, do you need breakfast this morning? And just make it as natural as possible, and then monitor them once they get to the classroom, touch base with the teacher. I might walk by that room a few more times than normal and check in, see what's going on. The teacher knows that I'm looking, so they'll give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. And we just want to make sure, because again, like Officer Julio said, I can't imagine being in that situation as an adult who's had many life experiences, and to have it happen at such a young age is just tremendous.
What the Handle with Care program does, it gets us to understand why. So we're not reacting to the physical reaction of the child, but we're coming to the child with an understanding of why. And once we understand it, then we can better address that child's needs.
Maybe the kid's just coming to school that day, he's having a bad day, he's acting out, looking for some sort of attention. As law enforcement and educators, we need to change our mindset. And instead of always saying what is wrong with this child, it's what happened to him that he's acting out this way. So it totally gives me a different perspective of how I look at kids now, because I feel that kids are not born this way, it's what they're exposed to.
We know that children are very vulnerable. Their brains are developing at a very fast pace, and at the same time they're very sensitive to any kinds of insults. So with ACEs, we know that it can impact the brain in areas of memory and learning. Long term, we see that it can affect ability to function as adults. And we know that children that are exposed to adversity have a higher risk for cancer, diabetes, mental health problems, and substance use disorders as adults.
Before the Handle with Care program, when children were traumatized by violent events in the home, they often were re-traumatized at school due to lack of communication.
We have to be very careful not to re-traumatize the individual.
A child can be traumatized just by witnessing a crime. A child can be traumatized by hearing the crime. A child can also be traumatized by being a victim of crime. They all have an effect on the children, which is why this program is so important.
As a result of the Handle with Care, there's a sensitivity that comes with the program. How to manage when a student is angry, or how to manage when a student is upset, as opposed to pushing them out and saying, oh, you don't belong here because you may have an attitude, or you don't belong here because you're being disrespectful. We are there to catch that and saying, you know what, we know that right now, because of what you experience, you may need a little love. You may need a little time. You may need a lot of support, a different way of doing things today, next week, for a month, but we're here to help you and we're here to support you.
So the Handle with Care programs gets us to silently monitor the students. So now you have all these eyes watching the student and seeing how they act, how they interact with people, and we can better serve them. To me, the Handle with Care program should be called Operation Salvation, right? Because what you're doing is you're actually saving the child with this program.
You can make a difference and change a life by simply sending the Handle with Care notice to the schools.
The form is very simple. Probably get it filled out within 2 minutes.
So the form will have like the child name, the grade, the date of incident. We don't give them too much detail. Just know that it was police presence, within their surroundings.
The child's privacy isn't breached. The teachers know that they have to handle the child with care, but the teachers don't know exactly the situation that happened.
The Handle with Care report will go to the principal, who then will give it to our staff, which is the school counselors, the social workers, the teachers, and so they will create a support plan for the student in order to service them.
I think the Handle with Care has really brought the police department and the schools together. We didn't have much communication before. We didn't know what they were doing. They don't know what we're doing. To see these children at home at night in an adverse situation, and then to have to see what they're dealing with in our buildings, has just made a great connection between the two, so that now they're putting together the whole child, and we are as well.
The Handle with Care program is a preventative measure for us to prevent children from going down the wrong path in life.
If we intervene early and we help children during the time when they are first experiencing a trauma, helping them to understand what happened, give them the support that they need, then we may be able to prevent the hardwiring of the brain in a way that's not functional, that's pathologic instead of helpful to them. And so we can perhaps prevent some of those long-term health consequences, including substance use, depression, cancer, diabetes, all of those things.
So I think it's going to deter them from alcohol use, drug use, because they're exposed to it at an early age, that hopefully this program will be a way to prevent them from falling into those traps.
Having the Handle with Care program allows us to build relationships more with the officers, relationships more with the administration and the teachers. And we know from research that relationships with positive adults is a very big preventative factor in students doing things when they get older that are unlikely to produce success, such as drugs, alcohol, and criminal activities. So this is just like the baseline of creating those relationships and having good role models.
I feel that we need to really push as a country, and we need to feel comfortable with it and own it. I think physicians, law enforcement, teachers, we all need to own it and be a part of the solution. And that we now know some ways, some pathways to get there, and we're learning more and more every day.
Handle with Care can have a far-reaching impact for the entire community. Our nation's future health and strength depend on it. Please be a part of this life-saving effort. Thank you.
Great. As we move forward, we're going to start a discussion now on implementation. So I'm going to bring back on Chief Lusner, who will help us in introducing our panelists for the next part of the program.
Thank you, Whitney. Yes, this next section will be a question and answer. We have some great panelists here. The one thing I would just want to mention, the training that we're doing today, trauma-informed training, trauma response training, whatever you want to call it, and we did it with my department in 2018. We've done some follow-up. The goal, in my view, is what School Resource Officer Julio Ruiz said. When we come in contact with a kid, a criminal justice setting or disciplinary issue, it's not what's wrong with this kid, what happened to this kid. And when you look at it through that lens, there's so many different opportunities when you approach that. Doesn't mean there's not consequences to behavior. But having that awareness and looking at it through that lens, that's the goal of the training that I hope police officers across this state and ultimately educators. I know there's some great work being done with trauma responsive schools across the state, but that's the goal. An important foundation to all this, in my view. So I just want to introduce our panelists. We have with us Levi Holmes, Executive Director, Office of Safety and Security for Howard Wilson School in Newark. We have Captain Elvis Perez, the Newark City Police Department, accompanied with Lieutenant Emil Cardona. We have Detective Mark Kronzalak from the Gloucester Township Police Department. Dr. Dave Salvo, Superintendent of Schools in Middle Township. We have Mr. Joe Castellucci, Superintendent of Lower Cape May Regional School District. We have Jen Enwell, School Resource Officer with Lower Township Police Department. We have Julio Ruiz, School Resource Officer with the Middle Township Police Department. And we have Chief Harkins with the Gloucester Township Police Department. So thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm going to start with Executive Director Holmes. Can you talk about the benefits realized after Handle with Care was implemented in Newark schools, Director?
And Chief Lusner, do you mind if I just cut in for one moment? I just wanted to ask all of our panelists, a few of you are self-muted, so if you just mind unmuting yourselves before you speak as we get those questions going. Thank you. Sorry for cutting in there.
No, thank you, Whitney.
Good morning, everyone, and again, thank you for having me. In the Newark Board of Education, we're blessed that we handled over 200 cases of Handle with Care. And when we realized that we had a reduction in the amount of suspensions at particular schools, especially schools that we saw a lot of violent incidents occur. And we attribute that to the Handle with Care program, because instead of doing the normal discipline or taking the normal discipline routes that we would normally take, we just replaced that discipline with a web of support, the support that we get from the Handle with Care program, and we saved a lot of students from discipline and therefore increased their ability to learn.
Okay, great. Thank you, Director. Next, Captain Perez and Lieutenant Cardona. Newark PD is one of the largest police departments in the state. Can you talk about how Newark City Police Department handles the logistics, has handled the logistics of sending the notice to schools within the city?
Hello, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Basically, our first step, as discussed previously, is we basically have a pre-designed referral form. We know that, which is completed by each police officer when the referral is being made. And it's once a referral is made, we send that that form to a designated email that is basically automatically distributed to Newark Police Division and the Newark Public Schools and everyone in the group. The good thing about this is that it's immediate. Newark, as you know, has a lot of schools. We have over 100 schools. That's easily over 36,000 students. So obviously training is important. We have a big department, close to 1,300 officers. So what we try to do is we train, we attend the roll calls, we speak about the program, we make sure that everyone's acquainted with the form. We also have our police director, Ambrose, also issued out a director's memorandum talking about the program. So this Newark Cares program is basically part of our curriculum. Every officer, whether young or old, is familiar with the program. We also keep a form, a copy of a form in each city computer distributed throughout our police department. So every officer has access to this form. Prior to the pandemic, when school was in session, we utilized our school resource officers. We have 7 major precincts. Each precinct had one officer assigned to it. They would read every morning the forms, the referrals, and they would physically ensure that the principal or that the counselors were aware that this is what we had going on with this particular student, and then they would take over. We also work out of our juvenile services section, which is real time. we have a whole department that caters just as juvenile functions, and the Newark Cares program is really, really important. The group also periodically meets to ensure that everyone is receiving notification and that our numbers actually match up. We have an actual database and we keep up with it. We also have a really good working relationship with Levi Holmes, who was actually part of this panel.
We might have lost Chief Lusner for a moment here. So we're just gonna hold off there for 1 minute as we just get him back on live. Chief Lusner, I'm sending you another webcam request.
Yep. Okay, I'm trying to accept it, Whitney.
All right, sending it again one more time. Thanks all for just staying patient here. No.
There we
There
go.
we go. I think we should be set now.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't know if it was me or everyone else. So, okay. Thank you, Captain. Next, going to move on to Detective Grozelinak. In Gloucester Township, there are numerous school buildings, including 4 different high schools. Can you talk about how Gloucester Township manages the referral process and what information is provided to the schools?
Good morning. Thank you, Chief. In Gloucester Township, we have a large school system, and we have a great working relationship with our school system. In 2018, at our annual memorandum of agreement, we introduced the Handle with Care. We started the program in September of 2018. We've had 492 notifications to our schools for various issues that affect juveniles' well-being. Until recently, the majority of the notifications are sent by me or my supervisors. But now with the new directive, patrol officers will be responsible for sending them promptly. The notification includes the principal's name, school, their dates, the name of the juvenile, any trusted adult at the school that they may feel comfortable with, their age and grade. And then it's sent to the school principal and the school resource officer that is responsible for that particular school. No information of the case is mentioned in that form. Principal then forwards notification to the school's counselor. Our SRO follows up with that counselor about the juvenile and discuss if any services are needed and what the police department can provide. We do have a social worker that's employed by the police department who runs several of our programs and provides counseling services free of charge. We have a weekly meeting that discusses all contacts with the juveniles from the previous week. Our huddle meeting is attended by all members of our unit, including the supervisors, the detectives, SROs, and the social worker. And we come up with a game plan of sorts to provide assistance to all the juveniles that are discussed and to ensure that the schools are acting on any Handle with Care notifications. And then from the huddle, our social worker officer often reaches out to provide any further services if they're needed, and just to see if anything that they can help out with the school. And as of right now, our schools have been great, and they appreciate the police department involvement with their students.
Great, thank you, Detective. Yeah, in Middle Township, we have 3 school resource officers. The officer scans the form, emails it to the school resource officers, then their supervisors, the corporal sergeant, and then the lieutenant in that division, to make sure somebody's off on vacation or training, that someone knows that notice has to get there the following day. I would also just share a little information to some things happening across the country around the logistics of the referral process. So I know in West Virginia, the Martinsburg, West Virginia, they have an app there for their officers. That's something that we've discussed here internally and across the state, where the contact information is preloaded in an app, and the officer can do it right from his or her phone or in the mobile data terminal in the car. I know in Illinois, Joliet, Illinois, I've spoken with them. They've done this program for a while. They have a computer system that runs every morning at 5 a.m., runs their calls for service against the databases of addresses that the school has provided, and then it automatically sends an email. So it's an automated process. And I believe the sheriff's department out there in Illinois is utilizing that also. So it's just some different ideas, to share with everyone on the webinar, how the logistics of that is handled. All right, Dr. Salvo, Middle Township. Hi, Dr. Salvo, how you doing?
Hi, Chief. Thank you, and good morning, everyone.
So, Dave, when a teacher is notified about a Handle with Care referral, what are some of the things he or she may consider doing?
Well, I think in general, you have to maintain a supportive classroom environment because you want to maintain normal routines. Students with trauma obviously feel that their life is chaotic in whatever particular situation that they were exposed to. So reducing those stressors by having a normal routine in the classroom is vitally important. And as a teacher, you don't want to judge the traumatic event. The feelings of the students matter most. You want to then raise the awareness of school staff and personnel. Even though it's a priority to respect the child's privacy, it's important to work with the staff, the stakeholders that will deal with that child, either the child study team or the school psychologist, and of course the administration to provide a support team for that child. Specifically in the classroom, you may have to modify teaching strategies. You got to balance expectations with flexibility with students that are exposed to trauma. For example, you might postpone a test. You might give them extra time for work. You might give them frequent breaks throughout the day. Provide verbal and clues and prompts to keep them on task. Use their strengths throughout the day to get them on task. And don't be afraid as a teacher to ask how you can help that child. I think that's very important throughout the day as you're working with other support people.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, and I think you hit it, Dave, and it's been brought up earlier with the notice. It's important that the teacher does not bring up the event. We know in some cases, if, say, we have a sexual assault case, the student even knowing that someone knows about that can be traumatic. So we're always very careful in the very limited information provided, and then taking the overall general supports that Dr. Salvo is talking about is really good advice. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Next, Joe Castellucci, Lower Township. Hey, Joe, how you doing?
Morning, Chief. Good to be with you.
You too. Can you talk about, I know you've done a lot with trauma responsive schools and school resiliency teams. Can you talk about how the Handle with Care program fits with school resiliency teams and trauma responsive schools?
Sure. First of all, it's great to see so many participants today learning about with care, because we feel it's another very valuable, vital component of our resiliency program. We started our resiliency initiative about 6 or 7 years ago in our district, and it began with training our staff, and that means our entire staff, our teachers, our support staff, our bus drivers. We wanted everybody to be aware of the effects of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and the fact that we have folks out there that are dealing with traumatic stress, particularly our students, and just create that awareness. The next step to our process was to develop some experts locally with regard to how to deal with students who are undergoing traumatic stress. We developed a cadre of resources and experts on those resources. So when we receive a Handle with Care, as everybody said, we don't bring light to it. It's just another awareness that we have a student among probably today or any given day that is dealing with an inordinate amount of stress and had a traumatic experience very recently. So we want all our staff members that engage with that student to be aware of that. At the same time, this heightened awareness allows for those individuals that may have a special relationship with that to perhaps engage in conversation, take an extra few minutes to measure the temperature of that student and decide whether or not they need additional resources. Some of the additional resources we have available to us that we can steer students in the direction of, again, another component of our trauma-informed schools is we have certain staff that are trained in mental health first aid. And perhaps if the student shows signs of collapsing under the pressure, we could divert that student or refer that student to someone who could help gauge whether that student needs some additional counseling or care. We also have other programs both during and after school. We have resiliency rooms in all our schools that have activities, that have events that occur, speakers, and even a counselor available every period of the day to take students in and engage them, not necessarily identifying essentially what the problem is, but engage them in conversation, stress reducing activities, that type of thing. We also have after school activities such as art therapy, Zumba, yoga, as part of our mindfulness program. And we have quite a good number of participation with that, but we also will refer students who we think could benefit from it. So a handle with care referral would be sort of the flashing light that would inform all of our staff, because we're all trained to be sensitive and identify these issues, that there's a student that if you see signs that they could benefit from any of these additional resources, to steer them in that direction. And we also have an advisee program that all our students are involved with. And the advisors would be aware of the handle with care when they meet up with the student to take special care to engage that student in conversation, see if that student does want to talk about what happened. Not bring light to it, but just to an extra voice saying, I'm here. If you need anything, let me know. We deal with grades 7 through 12, so we're dealing with older students, 12 to 18, 19 years of age. So our students are able to self-advocate and talk to us when they're ready. We just have to make sure we're available to them when they find that need.
So I think we might have lost Chief Lusner there again. So just so that we can stay on track here, if you just hold on one moment, let's see if I can get him on. But either way, what we'll do is we'll continue moving forward as we try to get Chief Lusner back on the line. I think the next question that Chief Lusner had was for Jen Elwell, the school resource officer from Lower Cape May Regional. Officer Elwell, do you mind sharing or talking about how Lower Township handles the Handle with Care referral within its record managing system? And how do you handle a referral where a student needs to attend a school in a neighboring community?
Morning. Thank you for inviting me to the panel. Sure, there's several ways we are recording these Handle with Care notices. The patrol commander actually has a log, so that's where it starts, where he puts all the information in and he updates it. When a Handle with Care is completed during the night or during the day when school is out, it is sent to this lieutenant and he is vetting it. From there, he is taking it, he is logging it, and then he will be sending it to the email chain that we have for Handle with Care. Every year we go through that email chain at the beginning of the year. We just did it in September. We discuss it with the superintendent, the principal, and see who should be on the chain. From there, it comes to us. I also have a log within my system at the school that I keep it on. We also have referral tracking log with the special services unit in our PD. So they will also receive a copy of it and then they will track it. They track it with child's name and age, the school, the date, the case number, and the outcome of the Handle with Care. And obviously we can also access it easily within our InfoShare, which is our call tracking system. So there are several ways to locate it and to keep track of it.
Great, thank you. I think we're still trying to get Chief Lusner back on the line, but as we continue forward, we'll just keep moving forward as the panel progresses. Also, I'd like to just talk to Corporal Ruiz from Middle Township. Another question that we had on deck here was, in Middle Township, I believe that Chief Lusner had mentioned that you arranged follow-up positive interaction in the days following the referral with the school resource officer and the student who has experienced a traumatic event. We were hoping that you could talk about those interactions and what you are hoping to accomplish when those happen.
Good morning, everybody. So one of the things that we do is obviously we have to follow up and check on the kid. So between myself and the principal, we came up with the idea to start a lunch program. So it's called Having Lunch with Officer Julio. So every Mondays and Fridays, we select 4 kids from our schools, and they come to my office. We have a high top table where they sit down and have lunch with us. So we take that format as an opportunity to involve that child that was exposed or witnessed a traumatic event and a way to follow up so that the child has no idea that we're actually following up on the incident, and make him feel like he's part of the lunch crew where we kind of interact. My hope through this whole thing is to close the gap between law enforcement and our youth community. You know what I mean? And one way to do it is, what we do is through this lunch program. Another way is we have officers that come into our schools, and all kids now, when they see officers in the schools, they're not like, oh, what's going on or what's wrong. They're more welcoming. We also started a trading card program. It's a program where officers have like trading cards, and we challenge the kids to gather at least 15 cards. And once these kids gather these 15 cards, they could go to the police department and they give themselves a little gift bag. So what that does is encourage kids to approach other officers as they're walking through the schools, start communication with them, close that gap between the youth and law enforcement, and start a rapport between law enforcement and our youth. I'm the school resource officer at the elementary level, so my goal is to close this gap at this age so that when our kids get prepared to go into the middle school, the high school level, they look at law enforcement from a different perspective and have a better communication between them and us.
That's phenomenal. I just loved hearing all those different examples and resources, some different. I think the trading cards is very cool. I've seen them in a local township near us, and but I didn't know that they were actually doing the trading. I've seen them in businesses and things like that, but to know that that is being done with the students to create that relationship, and as you said, build that rapport in elementary school, so as the students get older, that they have those established relationships. That's great work and phenomenal. Moving forward, we also had a question for Chief Harkins from Gloucester Township. One of the questions that we had here was if you could talk about how Handle with Care dovetails with larger community policing efforts, such as police youth engagement and mental health initiatives. Chiming off of just what Ruth had mentioned, just thinking about it on the larger framework of the initiatives and strategic mindset of community policing.
Sure. Thank you, Whitney. So again, it's a great honor to be part of this initiative. Again, New Jersey law enforcement leadership and our educators in the state are taking the lead, and they are doing great work in promoting community policing initiatives. The Handle with Care program goes hand in hand with all of our community policing programs. It's a perfect fit. Every chance that we get to intervene to treat a child's traumatic experience is an opportunity for us to build trust and build up a relationship with that child and with the school community so that we can interject ourselves in other positive ways. Having partnerships with our schools here in Gloucester Township has been a cornerstone of our community policing programs. The school resource officers are right there on the front line. They are the ones that are changing hearts, changing minds, getting to where the issues are. And it allows us, as it's been already said, this makes our police officers role models, the role models that they should be to our community. We implemented this in 2018, and I look at the 492 referrals that we had since we started, and those are 492 potential life-changing interactions that we've had. We've been able to interject a social worker. And what's always amazed me through looking at this program is how much feedback that we get about our educators and how many of these kids have trusted adults that they'll tell us about. They'll tell us that a trusted adult is a school teacher. And it's always a great thing when I hear the stories that the school teachers don't even know, or the counselor doesn't know that they're considered a trusted adult. And it just goes to show the relationships that they've been building and why this Handle with Care initiative should be interjected right at that level as early as possible. Things like search warrants that we never would have talked about, but we're letting the kids know, we're letting the school administration know to get somebody to give that kid attention. And it's worked so well for us. It's about building up partnerships. It's about building up community trust. And the Handle with Care, it's just another way that we've been able to do that. And for all those police chiefs out there, law enforcement officers,
I would just say this is an easy lift. It's an obvious easy lift. We already have this information. It's getting people to help these kids, and it's a cornerstone. It's what we should be doing. So I encourage everyone, embrace the initiative. It is a very effective program, and it's what we as police officers all signed up on for. It's what we want to do. We want to get help to kids. We want to prevent crime. This is the way to do it, and it fits right in part. So I commend all the teachers, the education, the Attorney General, Chief Lusner, and all the chiefs of police in New Jersey, the DEA, for getting this off the ground, because it really is, we've seen such a positive influence, and it's something that we should all embrace.
Great. Well, I think we have Chief Lusner back on, so I want to hand the baton back off. But Chief Lusner, just to give you an update, we continued on with your program that you have set there, talking to Chief Harkins about the broader police community relations and the importance of these initiatives throughout the state. But I wanted to hand it back off to you as you continue on.
Yes, thank you for filling in. Whitney's had some technical difficulties here. I just hit a couple things that Chief Harkins say. He used the word trusted adult, and we heard the presentation from Mike McKnight earlier today where he was talking about building resiliency, the common theme of a connection. I think that's a really important part, right? The first part here is how do we reduce the trauma on kids, and there's things we can do as police officers, handle with care being one of them. There's a whole nother section and things that we can do. I encourage everyone to take a look at the International Association of Chiefs of Police website and work that they've done with the Yale Childhood Development Center on how police can handle calls for service when children are present to reduce the impact of trauma. But the other piece is the trusted adult, the building positive relationships with youth. And police have a role to play there, not by ourselves, but cross-sector collaboration with partners in the community, with our school districts, with our recreation departments, with our broader community partners. There's a lot of nonprofit organizations in the community that want to partner with the police, that want to do some of the work. So things like police youth camps, things like trading officer card programs. We instituted a program where police officers twice a month in the middle school were playing video games, appropriate video games with kids after school, with a life skill lesson by a nonprofit, Cape Assist. So, looking for these opportunities to build connections between cops and kids, and then just people in the community. We're going to hear a presentation in a little bit from Dr. Kate Tumulty Felice talking about, how can we be trauma informed with ourselves. I've talked to a number of my officers that came from very challenging circumstances, that overcame those circumstances. And I've talked to them, why did you succeed? What made you overcome those barriers? And in one case, I was told about a teacher. In the other case, I was told about a police officer. And then I've talked to those teachers and police officers, and they say, well, I didn't do anything. I just liked the kid. I took a little interest in him. I had him over for dinner. We went to, gave him a ride to sports, took an interest. That child felt seen. And that relationship, I think a lot of us don't realize the impact we can have. And that has to be a large role that we have to play. But it really isn't. It's those relationships. And lots of times we don't realize the impact that we have. So that trusted adult, I'd say that's the piece that I think a lot of us are doing in law enforcement we can do more of. And again, it ties into what Chief Harkins said about preventing crime. This is directly connected to public safety. This is in the lane of public safety. I know Director Ambrose has been mentioned a few times on the call, and he quotes Sir Robert Peel, who said that the police are the public and the public are police. Well, he also said the success of a police department should be the absence of crime, right? And this is where these programs fall in, is preventing crime and preventing people from getting in contact with the criminal justice system and trying to be proactive. So with that, Whitney, I believe now we're going to move on to a question and answer period. If we have some, I have some questions here I'm going to look at. So look, can you reflect on the challenges that remote learning is creating on the Handle with Care program? Yeah, it is a challenge, especially in March and April, May and June here. We're in a hybrid format here in Middle Township. I know many schools are in the remote format, but it does create a challenge because that interaction, the cues that Dr. Salvo were talking about, the nonverbal cues you can give and also perceive to see what's going on to get an awareness isn't there. So we still do it. It's a challenge. We have communication with the school. The teacher's aware of it, tries to get as much information as they can through their interactions and just awareness. Again, we're not providing information on, the incident, but through virtual, trying to just get as many cues as they can and then do those referrals, but it is a challenge. Where should the schools keep handle with care notices? I don't know, Sarah, if you're on the call, can I kick that to you? I believe you covered that a little bit in your presentation. Sarah?
Sarah, I'm going to send you a webcam request to get you back on the line.
Hi, Chief Lusner. I can't see the chat. If you could just repeat the question for me on the
Sure.
handle with care notice.
Where should the schools keep the handle with care notices?
Oh, that's really going to be up to the school district and either their principal or the superintendents, however best they want to handle those notices and where they want to store them. For purposes of the directive, we are asking law enforcement to store them in a handle with care notice file in addition to their investigative file. So for the schools, I would imagine that they would have a full handle with care notice file, almost like the law enforcement officers would, but I would defer to the schools themselves and how they want to handle their storage and file keeping with the handle with care notices.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Is a military deployment parent fall under ACE? That's a good question. We have not handled it as an ACE. I don't know if, Whitney, if you can send a request to Mike. Curious to maybe get his, take on that. Maybe we'll bounce that off of him.
Sure, Mike, just sending you a request there.
All right. I think it would be certainly an added bonus, Chief. Just anything like that where the family is going through through a little bit of added stress, to say the least, is important for schools to know. So those kind of communications between the community and the school, where the school wouldn't automatically kind of find out about what's going on in the lives of young people, certainly would help.
Okay. Next question, if an ACE in July, or if an ACE happens in July or over spring break, would a notification still be made? Also, what about state children? I will say what happens here in Middle Township. Maybe I'll kick it down to Jen in Lower, or maybe even Chief Harkins. What happens over the summer? I can tell you, we make the notification in the beginning of the school year. We're just like, FYI, over the summer, there was a dramatic event. So we do communicate it to the school, but it's in the beginning of the year. Also, what about out-of-state children? We do not make, or we have not made notifications to schools out of state if someone was vacationing here down in Cape May County. Chief Harkins, do you want to talk about how you guys handle an incident in the summer?
Sure, Chief. So we try to, if an incident happens, we try and let either the staff know as early as possible. Sometimes we have the counselors that are in during certain times of the year. The principal will either consult with our superintendent, but again, at the very least, we're letting them know at the beginning of the year. This summer was obviously very strange with all the restrictions and whatnot, but oftentimes our school resource officers will be alerted, even so that they can best know how to either they have a relationship with the child possibly, or in cases they will know someone that may be able to get in touch with them. But it's definitely something that there's a gap there that I'm sure we'll have further discussions about as we evolve through it.
Okay. How does the handle with care notice get to the school? Delivered by hand, email, or fax? that's going to be up to, each individual department. I will tell you in Middle Township, it is email to our officers and the SROs, like I talked about before, and then our school resource officer will deliver that information in person or verbally to the principal in many cases. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to talk about the directive, how we decided to handle that. We've kind of left it up to them a little bit, right?
Oh, I think, Sarah, you might be self-muted there.
Yep, sorry, I'm jumping back and forth here. Yes, so getting the handle with care notice to the school, it's really going to be up to the school and the program and how they want to handle it. We're talking about, email systems, is that we could do that. We have faxes. So it depends, really depends on how the school wants to handle that.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's all the above. And I also mentioned a couple for the app that would give a message. There's different things that schools are doing. Are there any efforts statewide to universally train independent and private schools in this program, or is that going to be left up to the individual police agencies to do? I'm not aware of any statewide effort. I don't know, Mike, are you aware of anything for the independent? I know that they've been to some of the trainings we've done here in Cape May County, open to all schools, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but we've been doing those pretty locally and creating school level resiliency teams both in Cape May County, Atlantic County, and recently in Cumberland County online. But there's nothing overall statewide that would allow that to occur. It's great to connect school level resiliency team trainings with this initiative if it is going on in their area, and it's certainly something that I think kind of sets the context for the school around what this directive can do in addition to some of the other things that we talk about on those team trainings.
Okay. This question, after I send the notice to the school, what is done on our end? Who is going to do something better in that child's life? I get the confidentiality, but if the school is unaware of an incident and only observes a possible behavior in response to that incident, what is done? If criminal charges are involved or DC P&P is involved, then of course there would be some change. I'm just confused as to what schools are now supposed to do. Well, let's make sure we separate two things. I mean, a student being arrested, that information has been communicated to the schools. That's a different scenario. This is about a child being present. So I would say what the school is going to do, the most important thing is making sure they don't compound the trauma, right? That a student, say, witnessed an overdose the night before or a domestic violence incident or saw an act of violence, they come through the school doors and the teacher has no knowledge of that. I come back to the lens. They're going to view any situation that happens with their child through a completely different lens. And they're not going to take steps that are going to compound the trauma. For me, that's one of the most important steps of handle with care. So I would say that is actually doing something better in that child's life, that first step. The next step is going to be if they exhibit that they've been impacted by the behavior, there's going to be, support services potentially they're going to be offered. Maybe the child talks to the guidance counselor. Again, they're not going to get information, but I will tell you, Middle Township, kids have self-disclosed to a counselor or a trusted adult. And, as a result, services and help and support has been given to that child. So, again, separate criminal charges from a child just being present at an incident. And then I'll also say the broader, we talk about trauma-informed state and communities creating protective factors and positive relationships and the opportunity for trusted adults. In Middle Township, we do a police youth camp, and I know a lot of departments across the state are doing it. It started with Brick Township, but we've been collecting data on our police youth camps and kids that come from challenging circumstances they get into the camp just by recommendation of a teacher. We have so many kids interested, we don't have enough slots. In one of the data collections, we ask, do you have a trusted adult you can go to? And 2 years ago, 60 kids, 7% said before the camp they didn't have a trusted adult that they could go to, but now they do. I mean, I know that's only 7%, but that's 7% of 60. I mean, that's lives that you're changing in that circumstance. So again, this is a piece of what I hope is a broader effort that's going to happen across the state. And it's just not law enforcement responsibility. It's a cross-sector collaboration and us as a community together. Okay, next question. I'm interested in setting this up in my school. Do I start by contacting the local PD? We are a regional high school, so we would need to contact all the PDs of our sending districts when we work with 3 different precincts. I would direct you to the Superintendent's Association and the county prosecutors and the chiefs of police. This is directed by the Attorney General. This is in the process of being rolled out with this training. So I would start with your chiefs of police, who you should have a relationship with already with the MOU and the security. But also I know in Cape May County, and I believe in Cumberland, some other places, and the DEA took this approach. The connection between the County Superintendent's Association and the County Chiefs of Police Association is a good way to make sure you're not having overlap with logistics.
I'll call you after this.
How did you overcome a challenge when you're in a community that has a tense relationship between families and police? I have a couple thoughts, but I'll kick that to, I don't know if is Director or Captain Perez, do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. It definitely has some challenges, but it goes back to that first engagement. Here in Newark, what we're going through is a big transition period. We're trying to change that police subculture, and we've implemented station house adjustments. So we work closely with the community. I find that communication is big. And then when we do come across those situations, for example, we have a lot of search warrants. We've got massive training. We de-escalate the situation, and we find that although situations at times can be a little tense, that there's some good communication, de-escalation. We find that the parents and the families usually are on board. Our young people are investments. We're trying to get to them before they become a problem down the road, or if they have a potential. Programs like this, actually, it's quite the opposite. We've had positive experiences. We haven't had anything negative, but that's based on de-escalating the situation and just developing that engagement with the community. We're fortunate that Newark is unique in that sense that, as you can see even in the news, in these trying times, I think the community and the department, I think we stepped it up, and we really haven't had any problems, anything that has crossed that line. But I think it's a joint venture where the department and changing that subculture with the assistance of our police director, the team, and our mayor, we really haven't had any of that.
Okay, that's some good advice. I'd also say that, positive interactions between police and the community when there's not a problem, crisis, or emergency is important. Some of the things I talked about with police youth camps, the trading card programs, real community engagement, I think, is something that has a lot of benefits. And I think this Handle with Care program and the trauma-informed responsive approach helps that and helps build trust. It's not something that happens overnight, depending on your community and what the climate is. But I certainly think those are things that should be driving our decisions and should be the goal of where we want to get to. If trauma impacts a multi-level family, will the police provide information to all schools included, or will information given to one school representative, or he or she will distribute to the other schools? We are a pre-K to 12 district with 5 buildings. Siblings can be in 3 different educational levels or schools. In Middle Township, we give notice to each principal in each school district. So that's how we've handled it. Sarah, I don't know if if you heard that question, if there's anything in the directive that speaks to that or anything that you want to add. We provided to the three different principals in the buildings for the siblings.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note here is that there needs to be a handle with care notice for each child. So regardless of the school or the point of contact or how the school sets it up in that county or agency, is that each child needs one of these notices. So, you know, with your example, that's how it's done. I know there are some school resource officers where the handle with care notices might go to that individual, and that individual will then disperse it to the appropriate schools. And then those point of contacts will then give it to the appropriate teacher. So it's really going to depend on each county and agency and district and how it's set up. But I did want to add that it's really important that each of the kids, each of the students does receive the handle with care notice and given to the school.
Okay. Next question. The vast majority of time, it is the school nurse who sees changes in behavior first. Do you include them? Joe Casalucci, do you want to talk about that? Dave?
Sure. When we first entered into the program, we had a discussion about who in the district should be informed. So we wanted to make sure that we had key communicators. So if a nurse one in your district that is somebody that sees a lot of students, would necessarily be somebody who would be a first line responder or frontline responder to students, then certainly you should include that. I know that I receive all handle with care notices, not necessarily that I'm a frontline person, but if I know that my building person is not in that day or my principals are not in that day, then we make sure that we forward those to the appropriate staff members. So it's really up to the school who you want included on each notice. I'm not necessarily saying more the better, but you want to make sure you have fallbacks in case the key people aren't available. They have other people. We have representatives from our central office, each guidance office, each building administrator, and certainly some key people like a school nurse could be included in that list if you thought that was appropriate in your district.
Okay. Dave, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, we would include the nurse as much as possible. A lot of times a nurse already has a good relationship or some type of relationship with that student, and they have information, confidentially with their health records that may be important. So yes, we would include the nurse as much as possible.
Okay. All right, next question. I have a couple thoughts and then I'll ask you, Sarah, to chime in. I understand the release of juvenile information should be limited. However, the police are not immune from releasing information of juveniles under duty to warn. School teacher, doctor, and therapists are. Are we covered if information is released by the police? So just a couple things I would say. Again, you're just saying handle this child with care. If you are authorized by the state statutes that have already been cited by Sarah, you can release that information, which usually revolves around arrest or a criminal investigation, but follow those statutes. And the information you are giving is just handle that child with care. I would also say this is, I'd say, very close to becoming a best practice across the country. This started in West Virginia, the state of Maryland, the state of Tennessee, the state of Indiana, just to name a few, are adopting these programs. So, you know, I don't see any issues in terms of liability. Also, this is a directive by the Attorney General. But Sarah, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, sure. So Chief Lusner, I agree that this directive does not supersede or trump, like I said, any other statute that requires certain notification or information to be sent. However, the handle with care notice must still be made. So when we're looking at handle with care in, just with handle with care, there's no other information that's to be given over. But again, if there's a statute or if there's other requirements or a duty to warn, anything else in, that is a statute is not, this handle with care is not going to trump that. You still have those duties and responsibilities as well.
Okay. Next question. It seems there are some districts and PDs using this. When will the rest of the state begin to see this rolled out and being used? Sarah, do you want to talk about the dates on the directive?
Sure, let's see if we could share my camera again. Oh, here we go. Yes, so in addition to the training needing to be done by December 31st, that is this date that this directive goes into effect. So as of December 31st of 2020, the end of this year, the directive is effective and the Handle with Care notices should begin to go out to the schools should law enforcement respond to an incident of a traumatic event when the child is present and is a witness or victim. So it's December 31st.
Okay. Next question, how are confidentiality issues handled? It would seem that some parents would not want this info shared. In our district, we must get parent permission for ongoing services. So I think I've hit the confidentiality before. There is no information being provided other than that there was an incident that a child was exposed to and to handle that child with care. Maybe I'll start with Joe again. Do you want to talk about, do you have any requirement for ongoing services? I know, I would assume that kids come forward, talk to counselors all the time and, receive services within the school. And then maybe I'll ask Sarah to maybe comment also.
I think the key thing is that we want to handle the students, all students on every given day with a matter of respect. Assume that their day's not starting out perfect to begin with, but when you know that a student has had some type of interaction with police, so we don't know what that interaction was. It could be anything from, like you said, Chief, a domestic. It could have been maybe they were victims of a crime in that household. It could have been. But, that's a moment when the student comes in without his homework assignment, then maybe you don't get on the student's case about that. That's a moment if the student comes in and his head down on the desk first thing in the morning, there was some interaction with police. You don't know what time the police left that house. That might be a moment to again, handle with care. There's a reason we call it that, to either not approach that student, give that student plenty of space, or depending on your individual relationship with that student, approach quietly and say, do you need to go somewhere? Do you need to speak to someone? So it's not automatically that we throw resources at them, although we know when the time is right. We tend to have an idea when that might be appropriate. It's to respond appropriately, knowing that this student has just had more likely a very traumatic experience. And those normal things like showing up to class late, showing up unprepared, showing up disheveled, showing up tired may not necessarily follow the normal policy protocols. We would handle that student differently and a little more sensitively with that knowledge. We don't need to know what happened. We just know something happened.
Okay. I would also say in most cases, in our experience, there's been some type of incident that police are investigating. So we're collecting information anyway about who, what, where, when, who was present, who observed what. We're conducting an investigation in a large majority of cases. So we have that information anyway in our files as part of our regular investigation, and then it's just a simple message: hey, handle this student with care. So keep in mind that again, large majority of cases, we already have this information. We know someone was present. Sometimes we have to ask an additional question about, okay, where does the child go to school? But again, it's part of an investigation and questions that we're already asking. So it has not been a challenge that I'm aware of in other parts of the country that have done this. And I've done some things nationally with other departments, the National Trauma Campaign, and learning from police departments been down the road we're traveling. The next question, we have a couple more, we're going to wrap it up and we'll get to our keynote. So to clarify, the schools will receive a Handle with Care notice if the student witnessed something, but also if they were actual victim. Yes. When should law enforcement departments expect to have a point of contact list? Who determines the point of contact for each school. Since law enforcement are required to send the notice immediately and upon proof of receipt, should the point of contact be the principal of each school, who will then be required to send back a receipt of the notice that has been received. Sarah, I'll ask you to comment. I will just say that, we're in contact with the schools in our jurisdiction on a regular basis. We have school security plans. We signed the memorandum of understanding. So it's not like we're not in contact with them. So I worked out with Dr. Salvo, who was going to receive the information in Middle Township. It goes to the principal. Now, I don't ask for a receipt back from the principal that they received it. We do in our records management system and the investigative file that Sarah talked about. We do note that we sent it and who it was sent to. So there is a record that we sent it, but we don't ask for a receipt. And I just went to the superintendent and, we worked it out. But again, we're talking all the time anyway on various issues throughout the school year. So I would think your chief and superintendent in your school districts would work that out. Sarah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to know, so the directive does not require receipt of notification from the school, but like Chief Lusner indicated, I mean, this really is all about communication. You want to stay in contact with your schools. You want to stay in contact, with all the educators. So I think that, although we don't require receipt, that communication is really vital to this entire program and implementing it. So I would just encourage that you keep open lines of communication with your educators.
Okay. I think that's all the questions. I will talk with Whitney afterwards. If there's some questions we didn't get answered, we'll get it answered by the appropriate person and get back to you. So at this time, we're going to move on to the keynote. And it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote address from Dr. Kate Tumulty Felice, Professor of Education and Psychology at Rowan College of South Jersey. She's a master resiliency trainer. I've had the privilege and honor of working with Dr. Kate on a number of issues. She's fantastic, and I'm excited to listen to her presentation. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Chief Lusner. I really appreciate it, and I'm really humbled and honored to be here today. I really want to start by thanking you, the participants who are here, for everything that you do all day, every day to improve the lives of kids, of the community, of their families. And I guess I'm switching gears a little bit today because as we've been talking about that and how important that is, what I want to talk about is you. And you can see the title up there that this has to do with your own resiliency and recognizing your own triggers and your own trauma. I have to say that it's a little bit of a trigger for me that I'm the last presenter and I stand between you and lunch. So I'll try to be very respectful and thoughtful of that. But one of the questions that this kind of context raises is when you're working in this space, who's helping the helpers? And how do we help ourselves through the trauma that we go through, both from our own lives that we carry, those invisible wounds that we carry and carry well long term. And that in addition to the trauma that we face vicariously, that we deal with every day in our jobs. So to give you a little context of who I am and why I'm here with you today, I started my career in law enforcement. I worked in both major crimes and narcotics, and then made the transition into teaching. So I've taught K to 12. I now teach on the college level. I teach education and psychology. I also create wellness and resiliency programs for kids. I'm a master resiliency trainer and a subject matter expert on resiliency. And I do trauma-informed mindfulness with military, first responders, kids, and veterans. I'm telling you all that for a reason, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But if we could advance the slide, Whitney, and thank you in advance for your help in doing that. Just to talk a little about trauma as we've heard about today. And to see it in a context that makes sense to us, that we carry these invisible wounds of trauma and we carry them well. There's a Japanese proverb I like, and it's, you can't pour from an empty vessel. And So it brings us back to that question that who helps us? Who helps the helpers, the people who are dealing with these challenges every day? And in the world we're in right now, those challenges are compounded by so many social, life, medical, all kinds of different variables that we may never have been able to anticipate. So how do we recognize our own ACEs and triggers? And how do we harness those to help ourselves and to help others? Sometimes the helping others is the easy piece for people in the positions that you're in. It's helping yourself that seems to come after the fact. They say that when you're in an airplane, you should always put your oxygen on first before you help somebody else. But when we're helpers, our first instinct is to just go for, what do we do for other people? And sometimes that's the hardest lesson to learn. I'm going to share a little bit about my evolution with learning that. Whitney, if you could advance the slide. One of the things we've talked about today is our own ACEs, and I appreciate that you were able to take a quiz to look at your own ACEs. We've heard this term a lot in the context of other people, but what does it mean when it has something to do with us and puts us in that vulnerable place? So I gave you some of my titles before, but what you see on the screen right now, that's who I am, and that's why I'm here. There's a couple of things I want to show you here in this news article when I talk about our ACEs number. This article came a little bit after my dad, who was a police officer in New Jersey, was shot in the line of duty. He was shot in the face a couple days before Christmas and survived and carried with him those invisible wounds across our lifetime. And I didn't recognize a lot of that until we were in this space and learning about ACEs and learning about what we carry with us cumulatively. And Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And so part of this evolution has been my looking at my own experience. There's me by my dad's side in the corner of that screen. And when I look at that now in context, my dad's ACE score would have been a 9. Mine would have been a 6. And so when we look at that, we can think of, for me, we rip off a Band-Aid when we examine our own experiences and how it affects how we deal with other people. And when we have those triggers, we operate on autopilot a lot of the time. You know, we just go and we get things done. And that in and of itself can be a trauma response. But it's also adaptive, right? We can get stuff done because we learn from our experiences, we move on, and that's how life goes. Until life stops us, until life rips off the Band-Aid, until some experience happens, you encounter that one kid or that one case that brings forth some feelings that you're not maybe even in touch with, you're not even sure where they come from, where those triggers come from, that scratch off that scab and bring this right into our lives. So we're talking about ACEs today, but when we can talk about our own, it can empower us, it can inform us, and it can illuminate our practice. With that, Whitney, if you have the survey results and can bring those up, that would be a great thing for us to see.
I believe we're going to launch the poll now.
Okay.
So I think the poll should be up, and if everybody has the opportunity to vote now, the poll has just been launched.
Awesome. Okay, great.
Let's see.
And if you want to launch it and we'll refer back to it, that's fine too. Okay, so if you want to advance to the next slide and give people a little bit of time to take a look at that poll. Part of the reason I wanted to share with you my own experience and my family experience is because sharing our ACEs is a vulnerable place. Sharing our own history and how our history informs our practice can be a really vulnerable thing. I honor you by sharing with you my own experience, because I think when we can start to look at our ACEs, what our life brought to us, and a lot of it we can say, well, I got over that. But it can also be something we can use as a vehicle to communicate actively with other people. to give us that place of empathy to say, me too, I've been there. I know what that feels like, to recognize that in somebody else. And usually that's what gives us that valuable insight, because you've been there, you have the experience to recognize when somebody else is struggling with something similar to that which you've struggled with. Whitney, if you're able to advance the slide. Whitney, are you able to advance that slide?
Can you see the slide switched? I believe it switched.
Did it switch? Are we on that? On my screen, I don't see it, but
let's see.
I could be on a delay, not sure. The internet's been a bit crazy today. Okay, so I think you advanced it too. Do you want to go back just one?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. So if we look at this, and I'm sorry if I didn't see that, my internet's a little glitchy, so I hope I stay with you and you can hear me as well. If we look at this slide here, this is similar to what Mike McKnight talked to us about earlier in terms of what ACEs do to us long term. And this is uncomfortable data, but sometimes we have to get uncomfortable with that data before we can get comfortable in our ability to look at it for what it is and decide how to live with it. We might not just get to decide a lot of variables in our life and how long our life is, but we can decide how we live it. So if we can use our ACEs as part of our history, then we can harness that part of our story. Wait, if you want to move to the next one. Okay, so if I look at this, this is how I first started in this space. And I want to explain this one to you a little bit, because if you look at the side that explains law enforcement, that's not having to do with ACEs. So the first research that I did here is I looked at kids and ACEs, and that's a lot of what we talked about in the resilience film, and also what Mike McKnight talked about in terms of how ACEs affect kids cumulatively over time. So that data there is probably not unfamiliar to you, especially after today. Differently, I was doing research on cumulative stress outcomes for law enforcement. So you'll see that column on the other side. And what struck me, and this has the law enforcement side, is cumulative effects of their job long term, right? Not having to do with their childhood, not having to do with their ACEs, just what they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, this looks a lot like the ACEs research, what kids deal with when they've dealt with cumulative stress. What was interesting to me, and an eye-opener, and this is for both law enforcement and teachers, both of which recent research has shown are among the top 5 most stressful occupations right now. And I'm probably not telling you anything that surprises you because you're living that experience. But when I looked at this, I thought, what happens when we have historic ACEs and we compound that with the stress of our job and with the world that we're in right now? And I'm not saying that not to be hopeful, because inherent in awareness is hope. So when we look at that data and those statistics, which can be concerning, it's an eye-opener, but it's also shining a bright light on the hope that's inherent in those variables. The research at the bottom is recent research having to do with the recent effects of COVID and of social unrest in our world right now, that 1 in 3 adults are experiencing major, and 41% of kids, major significant anxiety symptoms, and that there's overlapping neural circuits there that are happening at the same time. Chief Lusner said, we don't realize sometimes who we're helping. We don't realize, and Chief Harkins mentioned, the role of an adult that can be a trusted adult for others. So the opportunity to do that and be that comes from our awareness of our own experiences and critical points of empathy. I see that the poll is up there again. What did you want to show the results?
Thank you for being patient there. We have a bunch of results that are still loading in. So if you wanted to go on, we'll wait 1 more minute and then we'll take all of those results.
Absolutely. If you want to advance the slide, I can talk about, will that mess you up there on the results?
I think that might hold us on the results. So sorry to have us pause there.
No
but we
worries
can
at
hold
all. No worries at all. We can wait for the results. And I just want to say, while those results are being compiled, I'm really grateful for people sharing this. A reminder that it is anonymous, but it can be vulnerable to dig at our own personal information. And it can bring up some things that maybe we like to and are really practiced at keeping down, and in this profession, both professions we're talking about today, education and law enforcement, we are practiced. We are very good at handling other people's problems. And sometimes we don't even realize that some of the basis and foundation of that comes from our own experiences. Today, I'm hoping we can shine a little bit of light on that, not to illuminate the concerns because of these statistics that we're talking about and that I just showed you. We already know we have high stress jobs. We already know that there are compounding variables to long-term health. But when we know better, we do better. And even further, there's a term I like to use called reciprocal resiliency. When we can know better about our own resiliency and well-being, we can help other people in developing theirs. How are we doing, Whit, on the survey?
I think we're doing well. I think we could share those results now. We have about half of those that are in the course right now that have submitted. So we're going to close those responses. And then we can share the results with everyone right now before we move to the next slide. Everybody should be able to see the poll results.
Yeah, I can see them. Thank you. So it's interesting that they sort of mirror a lot of the original research, but also, tell us something about our experiences and our audience, and what the statistics tell us about ACEs, but also, and probably most importantly, what our personal experiences tell us, what we can garner from our experiences and our traumas, but also that of those around us that we experience vicariously, coworkers, people we help, cases we go on, kids in our classroom, all of that tells us something and ties into, in a reciprocal way, our own experience. If you want to advance to the slide on the PowerPoint. Thank you. And if you can go to the next one. Thank you. So if we look at this here and what can happen, what a stress response can be. And I mentioned the word trigger. And if you look at that quote there, that sometimes we are comfortable in that place of stress, in that constant busyness, in keeping moving and constantly reacting to things. That can also be a stress response. And what it can do to us at times is to lock us into the fight or flight, that fight, flight, or freeze. It can bring us into the constant place of being in the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic nervous system, that sometimes we get stuck in that place of fight or flight. So we are experiencing threats. We're in a persistent state of alarm that Mike McKnight talked about, that we can't differentiate the threats from just normal reactions in life. And we can do that from our job tactically. We know the threats that are present. But what happens when we go home? What happens when something at home triggers us similarly to what we experience on the job? And I'm sure you all have experienced that, where you snap at somebody or where you just kind of shut down and you don't want to talk anymore. You need to kind of go into your own place and separate from that. One of the things we've learned about trauma research is that it changes us not just in our habits. If you remember back to like nature nurture, it's not just changing us in terms of, well, I went through this hard life experience and now I'm going to smoke or drink or have some kind of thing that might negatively affect our health long term. It changes us on a cellular level, all the way down historically with genetic trauma, but it can change how our DNA transcribes over time. So it can throw us into a certain way of reacting to things that might not even be in our awareness. And we do have the power to change that. We have the power to not stay in that constant state of threat. We see it with our kids. We know kids that they respond to authority or to discipline in ways that are not appropriate to the situation. But then do we sometimes do that as parents? Do we sometimes do that as spouses or as friends, where we respond to people in a way that maybe we respond to the people from our job, the people that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, you know, the people out on the street or the people in our classrooms, that, you know, we react to a situation rather than respond. And there are some simple ways that we can hijack that system, hijack the vagus nerve, and instead of going straight to that threat perception, which is a really effective place to be when there's a threat. When there's not a threat, how do we hijack that and bring us to a place of relaxation so that we're not standing at the counter, throwing down our meal, ready to deal with the next thing that gets thrown at us, but we're able to relax and be present in the moment and watch the game with our kids or interact or do what needs to be done. I had occasion, I mentioned earlier, to work with some veterans, and one of the things that they use that I'm going to share with you now, and I'll even ask you to humor me and give this a try. A Navy SEAL training commander had taught me a technique that we actually use with our little kids too. So it'll be familiar to a lot of you, and I'm going to show it to you actually, and it's called box breathing. Some of you may have seen this before. And really, it's a very simple technique of breathing where you breathe in for 4, inhale through your nose, hold it for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold again. And it seems really simplistic, and it works with little kids, and it also works for military people, troops going into battle. That in that moment of pause, we get to decide whether we are reacting in patterns that we have for a lot of reasons, because there are a lot of threats that come our way, or whether we're responding. If you could advance the slide, I'd be really grateful. I'm gonna share with you some information from someone I got to speak to in this space about how we sometimes carry this trauma with us and how it manifests itself in our lives. He says it much better than I do. And just to give you some context, this is the SEAC, Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of Defense, and he served 5 tours of combat. So coming home was kind of humbling for him to try and figure out, what do you do with all of that we carry? So from his words, if you could play that with me, I'd really appreciate it.
A father or a mother to living in a safe environment in the most sovereign country in the world, the United States of America, and that we have to continue to do the things that make us a solid citizen. But those wounds of the actions we've been in the past are still there. And the mannerisms and the standard operating procedures and everything is that we've been doing are still there. So when we see people doing things like a car pulls up alongside of them when they're walking down the street, and all of a sudden, if they're a military person, they assume a low ready position with an invisible rifle. It's because in combat, anytime a car pulled up like that, they had to be suspiciously alert about it. In law enforcement, if you see someone with a weapon out in public, even though they may have an open carry permit or whatever, automatically that light goes off that says, hey, this could potentially be a threat. And the same with our first responders in terms of what goes on when you're dealing with an epidemic or a pandemic like we're dealing with now. So the best thing about that we can do is to tell people you're normal. The abnormal circumstances you've been through, you're having normal reactions to that, and that's okay.
And there's a lot to be said there for those normal reactions to abnormal circumstances. Everything you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis is not normal to the rest of the world's perception. And sometimes that makes it harder to relate to people. So using that trauma to be able to relate to people is vulnerable, but it's useful. And what it looks like in your life, what your own trauma might look like, because I guarantee you're probably pretty adaptive at dealing with it, can be any of these things. It can be any of these behaviors that are symptoms to a root cause that you may or may not be in touch with. It can be something that's triggered by the experience that you have to deal with, by the people that you have to deal with. The first step is recognizing whether that is adaptive and helpful or whether it's maladaptive. If you could advance the slide, there are some different ways that trauma can look in our life. Need for control, to have everything the way that you think it should be, that you know the right way to do things. Again, that can be adaptive. That means you get the job done. That means if I'm going to do it right, I might as well do it myself. But it can also be maladaptive, because that can also bring forth a fear of trusting other people, a fear of connecting vulnerably and intimately with other people, because you don't want to give in from the way that you know is the most effective way to do things. It could be hypervigilance, like the SEAC talked about, having sensory sensitivity, where you're in that imbalance in your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system between threat perception and normal regular existence. It can be anger. It can be a quick switch to anger that is maybe disproportionate to the situation, that you didn't really intend to feel, but you just are overstimulated in that moment. On the flip side, it can be being over accommodating, not showing anger, saying yes because you don't want to engage, you don't want to get involved with that back and forth. Feel seeking we kind of know about. Feel seeking, I say, is some people would rather pick a fight and have something than not feel anything at all. That we can become so addictive to this hyper aroused state, this cortisol dump all the time, this lack of balance in our life, that we seek out sometimes those behaviors that might not be good for us, that become maladaptive. It's fine to be busy, but when we're overly busy and we can't slow down in the moment and we can't catch ourselves, it becomes maladaptive. So how do we recognize that? How do we not live in the past, not live in the future, but be right there and recognize what we're doing in the moment? And therein lies the challenge, because when we can do that, when we can recognize those patterns, we can help ourselves, but we can also help other people. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable sometimes to look at that, but it helps us to be able to help ourselves, help others. If you could move to the next slide. I don't just want to give you the problems that are inherent in facing our trauma, because it does sound like a negative place, but that's where the hope is. Because when we can recognize how to be well, we can avoid the things that make us unwell. And so I'm going to ask you just right now, if you had to think about it right in this moment now, and I'm sure many of us are multitasking, we are, doing other things, we're thinking about other things we have to do. But we're here, whether you're stuck here with me, whether it's a mandate, whether you want to be, right now, in this present moment that you have to sit in, that you have to be right here, that you can't be anywhere else. How do you feel? Are you anxious? Are you tense? Are you annoyed? Are you hungry? How do you feel? Often we're so concerned with how other people feel and what we have to do next and what the next 3 steps are, that we struggle to be right here in the moment that we're in. And with those experiences, the presence, being present and being comfortable in the moment, that can be uncomfortable. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable to be right there. They say if we live in the past, it's regret. If we live in the future, it's worry. But what does it even mean to be fully present in the moment? To catch ourselves when we're falling into those patterns. Not long ago, I have 2 teenagers, and I was dealing with my son. He's a teenager and he has strong opinions, and I had a very strong opinion of how something should be done. And his not doing it my way, I read as disrespect. So I'm a very sound sensitive person. I don't yell much, but once in a while I yelled, and I was yelling at him, and I said, and he came back and he yelled at me. And that was a shocker for me. He's a low-key kid. And I said, stop yelling at me. You're yelling at me. And he looked at me and said, you're yelling at me. I didn't even realize I was. Not to say I didn't have a right to, not to make any decisions on parenting for anybody else, but sometimes we don't catch ourselves. And I can't teach him how to respond properly if I can't get myself to. And in that moment, I couldn't. I had to be right there in that uncomfortable moment and I had to teach both of us how to get through it. And that's a hard thing. And it's not always easy to do, but it opens up that teachable moment. If you could advance to the next slide, I'll share a different perspective. This is someone who also tried to use her own experiences to better inform that of her students. I think you'll have to unmute again, Whit, but if you could play this one, I'd really appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Deborah. I am a teacher at a high school alternative program. I was lucky that I don't have any childhood traumas that I am emotionally dealing with now as an adult. I do have some adulthood traumas, one specifically being emotional abuse in a relationship that I am slowly but surely recovering from. Some days are better than others. I do work with students that all have had trauma of some sort. Most of them have either witnessed it personally or had a family member or themselves go through a trauma. And I find that being willing to share my own experiences with them helps them see that it is possible to come back from those type of traumas. Mostly it's, for me, I learned to deal with it by taking a moment and just not reacting immediately. That's the best I have as far as advice on when triggered by something in the present, that I do my best to just sit back and not immediately react. I'm better at it on some days than other days. And I try to help my students see that as well, that the best thing that we can do to move beyond or past our traumas is to not let them control us now. So that's my advice. Have a good day.
And that resiliency that she's talking about, that ability to bounce back from our trauma, the beauty part is there's so many things we can't control, but that's learned behavior. And we learn that from our environment. We learn that from the people around us. We learn that from the people who are willing to share in that space with us. And when we can do that, it becomes reciprocal. It becomes a reciprocal resilience because not only is she experiencing what she's experiencing, but she's sharing how to process those experiences with her students. They don't necessarily know all the details, but they know that she can empathize. They know that she can say, I know how that feels, and here's something we can do to work through it. If you could advance the slide, please. The tricky part is, how do we do that? How do we harness the moment that we're in? How do we teach it and do it? How do we walk the talk in those moments? No one's ever calmed down by being told to calm down. So I can't tell you that right now. I can show you a breathing technique, but I can't make you use it. I can't say that that's what will work for every person every time. But when we help kids through it, which is what you all signed up for, to help people, to help kids, and Chief Harkins said it, that's what you wanted to do. That's your purpose, and you do it beautifully. But what I guess I'm asking you to do is to give that back to you as well. Give yourself that grace and realize that what you're doing to help others, you deserve for yourself as well. And you're doing that for yourself. Every time you walk a kid and you talk to them and you calm them down, you're experiencing those same benefits. And that resiliency then becomes reciprocal. When we do these activities, when we can catch ourselves, sometimes just pausing in that moment. We use these techniques of box breathing with people who have anxiety. We use grounding techniques. That's what the other image is there. Just pausing for a minute. What are 5 things that you can see? 4 things that you can hear? If you do that right now, in this, Just pause right in the moment you're in. I asked you a few minutes before. Identify how you feel. Take a deep breath. These are things that are really simple, but bring us down a little bit and allow us to react to the next thing. Even if the next thing is unraveling right in front of us and it's somebody else's trauma. That pause helps us to get to a place where we're able to react to it. If you could advance to the next slide, Vic. Advance to the next slide. And I lost you.
Hi, my name is Dimitri.
I think it's one before that, if you can hear me.
Colin.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
Okay.
So if we look at this ability to rewire, to remind ourselves in the moment, how do we get there, right? I'm not going to be Susie Sunshine here, and that's why I have just stay positive and say, you know, well, all we have to do is breathe and it'll fix everything. Not necessarily, but you're already fixers. You already have that ability that you want to fix problems. I would even guess that there are people in your life that when they ask you for advice, you try to fix the problem and it frustrates them, right? Because we tend to do that when we're helpers. I can solve this, I can fix this. But we also have to realize when we're doing that and when it's better for us to be right where we are, to not have to fix anything, to be comfortable in being uncomfortable or accept it for what it is, and to recognize when we're spiraling, when that's happening. How do we check ourselves and realize when we're being overwhelmed? Recently, I was overwhelmed by a lot of experiences I had to do at the same time, take my kids here, do all these things, and lots of changes with work because of COVID. And I just shifted perspective a little from I have to do this to I get to do this. Just that tiny little shift helps my brain rewire. Something that simple hijacks that vagus nerve, that responsive reaction or reactive response, and creates one or the other. I want to be responsive, but I don't want to react to every situation. And when I can do that, I can open myself up to empathy. If you want to go to that that video now that was next, I'd appreciate that. This is a different perspective from Captain Dimitri Collins and how that works in her professional life.
Collins, I'm a county corrections police captain with Camden County Department of Corrections, and I've been here for approximately 18 years now. I'm also an Army veteran, so I've had my fair share of traumatic experiences. Right now, my responsibility is to supervise and manage 4 lieutenants, about 10 sergeants, 80 to 90 officers, and there are approximately 800 inmates within our facility at any given time. We have female and male inmates, maximum, minimum, and medium security. And this is a job that is inherently dangerous. It's a high pressure, high stress job, and it has its fair share of daily traumatic events that happen. So personally for me, in order to prevent myself from spiraling, once I get into the facility, I make sure that I arrive early enough so that I could kind of just take a moment and breathe and kind of decompress from my day. I work at night, so I'm kind of going over my mind and my day, things that I may have had to deal with, and I'm kind of decompressing before I even start my work and doing the things that I need. And once I'm working and I'm dealing with different people, I'm trying to recognize and paying attention to when I believe that they're beginning to spiral. Because I just keep in mind that everyone has some type of battle that nobody else knows about, that they're fighting possibly within themselves, within their own head, as well as at the same time dealing with the stress of the job. So if I see that, I try to remove people from the situation. If I see them kind of spiraling or looking as if they're having a hard time or they're stressed out, and I kind of pull them to the side and approach them from a space of compassion. and try to talk to them and see what's going on and try to get them moving in a more positive direction. A lot of people right now, especially, are dealing with a lot of stresses at home with homeschooling. And unfortunately, I have quite a few officers and sergeants who have children who have suicidal ideations and things of that nature. So I just try to provide helpful resources. And generally speaking, I'm just really approaching people from a place of compassion. Even the inmates, this is a traumatic experience. Coming into a correctional facility is a traumatic experience for most. Even for those who come in and out of the jail, unfortunately, every single time, it doesn't get easier. So the officers also have to, at times, approach the inmates from a place of compassion, understanding that this is a traumatic experience. Yes, there are certain things that have to happen. We have to do what we have to do, but they are also fine. So we cannot lose the humanistic part of this process. So that's what I have to share. I hope it helps. Have a good day.
Thank you. If you could advance the slide, Whitney, I'd appreciate it. So when she talks about, how she does this as a leader and considers her team, it kind of, and her purpose, thank you, for her experiences and her empathy, we can think about that. What can we do with our own experiences and our own empathy? But we can also think about who's surrounding us to help support that. And that's a key concept of resilience, is who is your social support system? So I want you to consider a couple questions with me. If you were, choosing your cabinet, if you were choosing your board of directors, what people in your world would you put on it? Who would you trust to have your back? Because the thing about trauma is, and creating adaptive behaviors, we have patterns of behaviors, patterns of people in our lives, and we repeat those patterns over and over. Life has a way of doing that we repeat them over and over, some say until we learn them. So you have patterns in the relationships that you create, the people that you bring into your life, the people that you feel most comfortable with, and many of them come from your childhood. That can be great if you have a history of healthy, good, positive relationships, but it can also be a maladaptive response if the people that you choose to surround yourself with, you notice the same things happening in each of those relationships. Sometimes we add by subtracting, and sometimes we have to consider whether those patterns are helping us do better and be more resilient. So if you had to consider the people in your world, who do you see text you and you look at your phone and you smile and you feel good? And whose do you see triggers you and it just makes you cringe and it's going to be a negative experience? When you have something happen in your life, who's the first person you want to tell? Who can you reach out to when you're going through a hard time and they're actually going to listen to you? What relationships in your world support that? And are those people and should be nurtured? And which are not supporting you being your most resilient and your most healthy self, which might be reflective of patterns that you have, because the relationships you create are the relationships you mirror. So when we can recognize which ones trigger us, we can improve it and we can turn the triggers into a triumph. We can make it go from a maladaptive response. I keep bringing people like this into my life or into my organization or into our leadership or however into my classroom, who I work with or I'm gravitating toward the most. And we can really consider who those people are and whether they contribute to you being your best and healthiest person. Do they help you through the things that trigger your hardest moments, your challenges, and your adversities? If you could advance to the next one, Whitney, I appreciate it. So I want to consider things that we can actively, practically do, because we can't always control everything that happens to us. We can't control other people, but we can think of what can I do right now in the moment if I have to be here, if I'm present in this moment. The first thing I can do, whether I'm working with kids, whether I'm working with my own kids, whether I'm in a classroom, whether I'm by myself, I can be present right here in the moment. What can I see, hear, taste, feel? What sounds are going on in this room around me? how do I feel right now? Am I comfortable? I'm getting hungry. I don't know. What are the feelings that I feel right now? That can take 20 minutes. That could take you 2 seconds. Pause as soon as you walk into a room, right? Remind yourself, rewire. Why am I here? What is my purpose? It's hard to walk into a room if we just have to walk into it and are trying to, deal with whatever things we have to deal with. It's easy to walk into a room if we have purpose. If we walk into a room and we have to tell people fire, clear out, then we charge right in and we know exactly what to say. But if we're present and we don't think of what's my purpose, why am I here, why do I want to do this, it becomes a little fuzzy and we get a little lost. So sometimes directing ourselves, just pausing and breathing, taking that 4, if that works for you, breathing a little bit, inhale and exhaling a little bit longer, and just pausing, considering who it is that helps you through those moments. Who is your circle? Trying to really consciously think about who's in your circle, who's in your world, who do you go to that makes you a better version of you? Physical movement or activity. If you think tactically, or if you think in the classroom, you move around when you want there to be engagement. Same kind of thing for you to move, physically move locations, work out, take a walk, remove yourself. Gratitude. So I'm going to ask you to try this right now. If I have a lot of teachers too here, and I think we most remember a noun, person, place, or thing. If you could right now, humor me and think of person, place, or thing that make you grateful. One of each that you have gratitude for. My kids always come to my mind first. I'm grateful I have a place to live in. And I'm grateful right now for technology and hoping you're hearing most of what I'm saying. But I appreciate your time. But when we can rewire into gratitude, it's all part of that pause. It brings us to that place where we can just kind of relax for a second. And in that comes the grace that we can give ourselves. If you could advance with me. And I'm grateful for that. And I know from working in both of the fields that are with me today that actions speak louder than words. And we can say all this stuff on a screen, but unless it actually gives us something to do, to change our practice, to change our life, to improve my interaction with my family, with my kids, in my job, it doesn't really do us much good. So to give you a little context of what I mean by acta non verba, or acting more so than words, and the physical, what that can mean, and having grace, how we affect other people from our presence. If you'll humor me, I'm going to give you a little experience of my own that when the first time I had to testify in court, a lawyer said to me, I don't want you to answer any questions, even your name, until you take a deep breath. And I tend to talk quickly. You might have picked that up. And I said, really? That's all I have to do? Yep. Before you answer anything, just take a deep breath. I don't care if it's your name. I don't care what it is. Later, I realized that giving myself that pause really helped me when some of the questions got hard. And I would pause, and it gave me my composure. It gave me a little bit of grace in how I was dealing with the situation. So when we can do that, even if you think of a pause, if someone is in an accident or something like that, when they're tense, and it's usually when they get the most hurt. When someone comes up to you, a student to ask a question, or a kid that needs something from you, and you're reactive, you're tense, that's usually when you give the reaction that you regret. So that pause becomes really important. So if you remember this acronym or not, doesn't really matter, but if you take away any of the components of it, this is the kind of stuff that if you take just a piece, maybe it'll help you in helping yourself and giving yourself some way to process and to create a new pattern, to deal with the historic, whether you want to call it trauma, adversity, challenges, ACEs that we carry, and creating new patterns for yourself so that you can help yourself first to be able to help others. So if we can ground ourselves, if we can rewire our thoughts back to our purpose. Chief Harkin said earlier, this is what we signed up for. This is the good stuff, right? So this can bring us back to that moment. All of those annoyances. This is a tough world we're in right now. There's a lot of things that are, weighing down on us. There's a lot of lack of appreciation. We're in a thankless job, in a thankless world right now. It's hard. So when we can bring ourselves back to that purpose, to the people that make us get up and do this every day, it can help us get through some of that. When we can physically move ourselves, tactically move ourselves, check ourselves, we're not going to be able to ever change other people and how they're going to react to something, but we can change what we do and then change that whole dynamic, right? And simply the exhale, that reset to something that is a healthier place, a healthier space, bring ourselves back to that purpose, bring ourselves back to even just a moment of homeostasis where we're not geared up, where we're not, as reactive, and be more responsive. This is a gift we give other people, and you're good at that. You've dedicated your life, you've dedicated your career to other people. But we have to first take care of self before we can take care of others. And I give you this because as a reminder to give yourself the grace that you show to other people. And that's a reminder a lot of us need. And it matters. It makes a difference. So I'm going to ask you to advance the slide, Whitney, because I had occasion to remember to tie back to that purpose. If you could just take a moment and look at some of the responses I got from students. And I want to remind you that these students know some of you. These students have been taught by many of you. These students have had encounters with lots of people who are on this call or will be watching it as law enforcement. And I just want you to see it through their eyes. You could just take a moment and read their responses. It helps us see with a little bit more clarity when we see it through the eyes of other people. And when we realize that if we can recognize our challenges, we are helping other people with theirs. If you want to show that video, Whitney, it relates.
Eva, I'm 15 years old and I'm a student from New Jersey. Police and teachers have helped me at all different stages of my life. Hearing what they have overcome in childhood and young helps me overcome my own adversities. Their resilience inspires me to have empathy and compassion for others, so much so that I want to work in the law enforcement field when I get older. Use education that my teachers provide to me.
What you'll deal with in your job, what you deal with every day, whether it's kids, whether it's what you bring home, all of those things can trigger your trauma. But what you do with that is what helps you be more resilient. When we can pause and breathe and recognize that that's what's happening, that there's something that's tugging at our soul a little bit, then we have that ability to see it with more clarity. And that can be a certain case or kid in your class that for some reason they're just pulling on your heartstrings. All of that ties into our history. It can be that kid that drives you up a wall. It can be the thing that your own child or somebody in your life says is just a pet peeve, that just, what is it? If you think of that, what is that one thing that if somebody does that, oh, that throws you off? All that's just information as to what I can do next and how I can choose my path. But what I want to remind you of is when we go back to why we did this in the first place. There are people to whom it really does matter. We're in a world full of social discord. We're in a challenging world. But to know that the purpose that we have, if we remember that, and there aren't a ton of reminders out there, but there's a few on this screen right now, and I could have found dozens and dozens and hundreds more if I kept digging. It does matter. What you tie into, what you pull from your own history is what is reshaping the legacy that you leave and the future that we give. If you could advance the slide, I just want to show you one more thing. There's a couple of quotes there that speak to what I just said, that your experienced trauma, your vicarious trauma, your cumulative trauma does affect your practice, does affect you professionally and how you live your life. But that can be something that turns into a place of building rather than destruction. It can bring us back to our purpose. It can allow us to pause, breathe, reset, come back to our purpose and be grateful for that purpose that drives us, that gets you to do this hard, thankless job every day. That image there, I don't know if anybody's familiar with that art. I learned about it and I thought it was really cool. There's a bowl and you can see it has, if your video looks like mine, gold cracks in it. There's a Japanese art called kintsugi, and what they do is when something is cracked, they fill it with gold because they feel that the cracks make it more beautiful. It's part of its overall history. The cracks that we have, the adversities that we have, the traumas that we have, the things that break us are the things that make us more beautiful and connect us to other people. So I ask you to please know that I'm very super grateful for your time today. I'm grateful that you shared this time with me, and to be part of an initiative that aims to help kids through their trauma. That you're the vehicle, you're the person that has signed up for this, that will be doing this to help kids through the hardest times in their life. Make sure that you take the time to realize that that is grounded, and the foundation of that is what you have been through. And it may be thankless and it may be difficult, but it is what carries you to make a difference in the lives of others. Please take that grace and space for yourself to pause, to breathe, to recognize those triggers, and to give yourself the grace that you give other people. I appreciate your time, and I wish you the best in wellness and safety and in doing what you do. There are so many, including me, that are truly grateful for what you do, and it really does make a difference. Whitney, I'm going to turn it back to you because I think you have a forum for questions and answers.
Yeah. And hold on one second while I just take this down. Let's see. But thank you again. I think that was really great, and just really great session on just being mindful and just more cognizant of all of our ACEs and just ways that we can acknowledge and try to reset ourselves, which was great. So we have a few, just only a few questions. We're getting a little tight on time here.
Sure. I'll talk quickly. I know lunch is coming.
No, it's okay. But we have one question here that says, what does the research say about the ability of someone with a low ACE score to be able to understand, engage, and work with somebody or student who has a high ACE score? And then I think that's really great, building off the poll that we had done, considering that there was a large amount that were on the lower end of ACE scores in the panel here. Is there a strategy that needs to be employed to show that person how to engage with folks who have such high trauma when you cannot relate yourself?
Absolutely. And I think the most important part in my answer is that question. The fact that you're even asking that question makes you open to that awareness of what ACEs look like and recognizing them. And I think that's really crucial, because that's what working in this space does. We all have different experiences that we're bringing to the table, but we're learning from each other's experiences, and that willingness to learn. The ACEs research has evolved a great deal from even the original study that was done by Kaiser Permanente. A lot of stuff we found out. And so we can look at that a little bit. We can share with people around us, but just that question and that willingness to be open to understanding the experiences of others is really where the answer lies.
That's great. And I just wanted to say that there's so many comments coming through about how amazing this program is. There's one question here that says, are there any programs that you would recommend to provide trauma-informed training for school staff professional development?
Absolutely, and I think Mike McKnight is a great resource for that. And he does great trauma-informed school training. I'm happy to help with that as well, if I can help in any way. We've done some programs together, so there's some really cool opportunities for that in schools. A lot virtual, I've seen some. I guess that's the world we're in right now, but this live forum like this, I think we would be great resources for that. Mike has some great things in place. Some districts have already done that program to be trauma-informed schools, and he has a 3-day program that revisits. But if there's professional development that's needed, certainly we can help in this space and answer those questions. So I'm trying to be quick, but I will also offer that as a resource and know that we can put you in touch with more information that could be helpful too.
Great, thank you. And I think most of the questions that we have are more about the sharing of the materials afterwards. So again, we will have this video that will be posted on our YouTube. We may have to clip some of the video pieces that were presented just due to copyright issues, and also just for the respect of the participants who shared their testimonials. But we do have a comment here that I wanted to share that I think matches well. Somebody had mentioned, last night my neighbor tragically passed away and was found by his kids. Thankfully, the police officers in the scene knew me and knocked on the door, and I was able to take the boys home from the police, and while the police dealt with the situation at home. These officers were absolutely attuned to the situation and sent out the DARE and school resource officer so that the boys knew that there was somebody that they could talk to. This is going to be a difficult road for family and law enforcement and schools, but this is so great to see so many community members willing to be part and helping this family and so many other families heal. This is a great program for the health and wellness of our kids. So just wanted to share that as well.
That's beautiful. I think this is such a time of healing, and the fact that we're healing holistically together as a community, and we're bringing all of these different entities who are doing amazing things to the table together, it's working smarter, not harder. We're using the best skills and abilities of the different shareholders for the most precious resource. So it really brings that all together in a holistic way.
Mm-hmm. Great, and again, we have a few more questions coming in, a lot on implementation. So again, if you have any specific questions on implementation, we are going to, based off of just the great feedback that we had from this program, try to compile as many of the same questions that we received and put together an FAQ for all those that were in attendance so that you can have that as a resource and also share that back with your districts and your departments as needed. So thank you for those questions there. They will be addressed, if not today, stay tuned in email. We'll try to follow up as best we can. And I have one more comment here from the AG himself, who was able to participate virtually. He was watching in, and he just wanted to say, from home, he was quarantining at home, and just wanted to say a special shout out to the panelists and all of the speakers, to our keynote, to DOE, DCJ, including our very own Sarah Quigley. He said he had to sign off, but this was very well done, and I'm confident that all that have spoke today and that everybody had joined us is going to do everything that they can to truly improve the lives of those with this program. So just again, thank you to everybody who was able to join on. This is really great work, and really great that we could have, I think, 1,300 people consistently for about 3.5 hours. So thank you so much, Dr. Timothy Kate Felice, for your keynote there. Thank you all to our speakers for joining us today, and thank you to all the participants. This was a really great program, and just stay tuned in your email for follow-up with again, with a lot more implementation questions and a lot of answers that you may have as we continue on with this program. So thank you there.
Thank you, and thank you to your team for putting this together.
Thanks all.